Hello, everybody. Welcome to the regular business meeting for the District of Squamish. Today is Tuesday, December 17th. Holland Squallen, Klistluktmut, Kla Squamish Ochmeo. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation, where we live, work, and play. Please be advised that this council meeting is being live streamed, recorded, and will be available to the public to view on the District of Squamish website following the meeting. If you have concerns, please notify the corporate officer present at the meeting. Can I have someone move adoption of the agenda, please? Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Hamilton. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. And just we have Councillor Stoner participating remotely today. I just wanted to acknowledge that she's here in that capacity. And so today we have no delegations or proclamations. So consideration of unscheduled public attendance. Is there anyone that wishes to address council for a matter that's urgent? And seeing nobody, we'll move on. We have no public hearings, no scheduled or timed items. We're going to the consent agenda. Anyone like to pull anything from the consent agenda? Councillor Anderson.
Yes, Mayor Herford, I wonder if I could have item C1, the quarterly WLNG Fortis BC projects update pulled for discussion. Thank you.
Yep, happy to do that. Anything else? Okay, seeing no other suggestions for things to pull from the consent agenda, is there someone that could move it the consent agenda? Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Hamilton. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And we'll deal with that item in due course a little later in the meeting. So Council, we have some consideration of committee recommendations. So we're on to item 8.1, Water Master Plan endorsement. And I will move that if there's a seconder. Seconded by Councillor French. All in favor? Motion carries. Next is the recommendation around municipal speed limit reduction. Would you like to? Councillor French moves it. Councillor Hamilton seconds it. Would you like to make a comment on this, Councillor Hamilton?
Yeah, thanks very much. I did vote in favor of this motion during the committee of the whole meeting, and upon reflection, I'm not convinced it's the right direction. Respectfully, the report from the consultant used some questionable, not even questionable, just plain incorrect mathematics in how it came to and prioritized the projects. And I completely understand that it's more than just how we deal with the numbers. There's also what direction we think is correct moving forward. And I'm not seeing moving downtown to 30 kilometers an hour and then potentially moving the rest of the community to 40 kilometers an hour, because that seems like a complicated solution to me. So as opposed to just moving towards a blanket 40 kilometers an hour sometime in the future, even if it's delayed till 2026, I see the combination of a 30K zone downtown and a 40K zone everywhere else as more complexity than we need in the speeds in our community. Anyways, so for that reason, I won't be supporting the motion.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments on this at this time? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And oppose? Councillor Hamilton and Councillor Greenlaw oppose. Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we have the traffic calming policy update. Are you moving that, Councillor Hamilton? Seconded by Councillor French. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Next is paid parking implementation phasing. I'll move that if there's a seconder. Seconded by Councillor French. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And then Housing Squamish Contribution Agreement is the next piece. Moved by Councillor Hamilton. Seconded by Councillor French. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next we're on to bylaws for consideration of first and second reading. This is the District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw number 2500-2017 Amendment Bylaw, which is the Garibaldi Estates Neighborhood Plan. And I will turn it over to our staff to run us through presentation when they're ready.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you. My name is Matt Gunn. I'm a planner for the District of Squamish, and I am here with
Jesse Fletcher, Manager of Current Planning. That was unexpected.
Thank you. Tonight, I'll be presenting the Garibaldi Estates Neighborhood Plan for consideration of first and second reading. The Garibaldi Estates Neighborhood Plan was initiated in 2021. The process has involved multiple engagement stages. In stage 3 of the process, the community considered land use scenarios and policy directions. A draft plan was developed in stage 4. In the second half of 2023, during that process, the drafting was impacted when the province initiated changes to land use legislation. That legislation was incorporated into the draft plan, which was published on Let's Talk Squamish in June of 2024 this year for consideration by residents. Council considered and provided feedback on that draft plan at a committee of the whole in September of this year. And today I'm presenting a plan that has been updated to address the feedback received from Council at that meeting. The neighborhood plan outlines a vision for the future of the Garibaldi Estate, which aligns with guiding principles that were developed during the planning process. The plan promotes a complete community through an increased diversity of land uses. Employment and services are supported within the Garibaldi village and throughout the neighborhood as accessory commercial units. Mixed-use retail residential buildings are envisioned as part of a new pedestrian-oriented high street along Diamond Head Road. Expanded ground-oriented residential uses, such as multiplexes and townhouses, are supported between Mamquam Road and Diamond Road. Public open spaces are supported throughout the plan through policies that include the development of a greenway along Mamquam Road and a new neighborhood park. And the plan highlights transportation and connectivity opportunities through proposed improvements to active transportation routes and the establishment of mid-block connections. Following the September 24th, 2024 Committee of the Whole meeting, as I noted, staff made several changes to the plan. And as noted, these were almost exclusively based on the feedback from Council. I'll go through those now. First, residential policies. The heights for the mixed-use residential areas were increased to 6 stories. On Diamond Head Road, supported density was increased from a floor area ratio of 1.6 to 2.0. Consolidation of properties is supported to facilitate development viability and will likely be necessary for initial developments where a lane from Diamond Head Road is needed for parking and waste management access. And so policy language was added to the plan to make sure that was clear. For the residential area between Checkmas Way and Garibaldi Way, policy was added to address the height discrepancy between buildings on either side. That's specifically what are now townhouses that are supported to the east of Garibaldi Garden Courts area, which is supported for redevelopment to 6 stories. And support was added for tiny houses in the plan as well. Oops. The active transportation network plan was amended to support bikes along Diamond Head Road. Support was added for bike share and car share programs, including support for car share parking near a future transit exchange. Policies were clarified regarding end-of-trip facilities and parks to specify that they were referencing covered bike parking. Policies were added to support frontage improvements along the proposed Mamquam Greenway. These include support for higher densities and reductions in common open space for townhouse developments that make frontage improvements on Mamquam Road. This was specific to comments about a desire to understand how we could ensure those frontage improvements could be supported financially. Support was included for existing deconstruction of building policies, and some minor proofing was completed for some typos that were discovered following the agenda being distributed to council members. So there was a few last minute things that were caught and corrected. Staff would also like to provide clarification on a couple items that were discussed at the meeting, but staff didn't do an adequate job of providing some detail around. One was about the corner properties along Diamond Head Road. There was some question around what was supported on these properties that are highlighted in blue on the map. And the plan had specified that these were intended for mixed-use development. There was some confusion because these ones, which are identified in red, are supported for exclusive residential use in order to support the construction of a lane that would run north-south between those units or those properties. But the specific policy language does not extend to the properties that are along Diamond Head Road. So just to make that clear, those corner properties along Diamond Head Road will have retail at grade. Policy is included in the implementation section of the plan to address the creation of a resident exempt parking zone. And the intent is to manage on-street parking along Diamond Head Road and adjacent roads. There are a couple of policies that support establishing a MIG-BOC connection between Garibaldi Village and the residential area to the east. So there will be continuity of connection east-west. There were some comments regarding the heritage statement that had been integrated or that had been produced alongside with the neighborhood plan. And those statements have been integrated into that document, which is outside of the neighborhood plan. And as of this afternoon, that heritage document is now available on Let's Talk Squamish. And finally, I do want to make one note that's come up through this last part of the process. There is discussion underway from one of the landowners, the large property along Mamclam at the base of South Highlands Way. They're proposing or fulfill some of the goals that are outlined in both the Parks and Rec Master Plan and in the Estates Neighborhood Plan. But one thing that I just wanted to highlight is that if that proposal comes forward as it's currently being discussed, staff will make sure to bring council information about what that requirement for ongoing maintenance would be if that park were to be created. So just want to highlight that as something that may come forward if this plan moves forward, is adopted, and that development application comes forward. Staff formally referred the plan to the Squamish Nation and Tsleil-Waututh. Both nations thank staff for the update without comment. School District 48, the SLRD, and BC Transit noted that in past years, student enrollment has remained flat despite the increase in housing units within the District of Squamish. And so they don't anticipate challenges associated with the proposed growth that's outlined in this plan. And if anybody wants to know more about that, I had a fairly lengthy conversation with the facilities manager at School District 48 on that. The SLRD noted strong alignment between the Garibaldi Estates Neighborhood Plan and SLRD policies. They offered some policy ideas. Most of those policy ideas actually would align better with updates to high-level plan policies, likely within the OC of inclusionary zoning to target through rezoning applications. So that's something that could be carried forward into a future OCP update, but not appropriate, I think, for the Garibaldi Estates plan. And reduction of parking requirements and for higher densities and mixed uses near planned transit services. So the comments we got through the referral were moving forward. Should council support the staff recommendation, the next step in the process would be to conduct a public hearing. The staff recommendation addresses the Local Government Act requirements regarding consideration of referrals. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Questions on what we've heard or the reports? I will ask for clarification. Can you go back to the, I don't know if that's me or not, that the slide you had was just was it planning 2 slides back, the one more, this one, the resident exempt parking. I just wondered about, could you run me through that one more time? I just want to make sure I understand this, as there's other parking work happening. I just want to understand exactly where this sits.
Yeah. Let me just pull up some language just to make sure I nail it. But this came from concerns that arose during the planning process, where some residents expressed concern about the implication of more housing in an area that already felt crowded along Diamond Head Road. And certainly if we go to mixed use buildings and higher densities, there will be a lot more people and cars there. And so there are concerns about what the implications are there. I just want to see if I can get the exact wording here, because I did outline it in here. So the idea was to propose policy that isn't a requirement at this point. It's just policy directing something that should be considered. So therefore, it's not tied to what's going on with our current parking policies. It's not an extension or integrated with that, but it does build off some of the ideas that came out of that work. One of the studies that was more recent talked about the idea of resident exempt zones, and so we borrowed that language and said that which is being proposed for some areas of the community, here's an area that looks like it could face some of the similar challenges. Let's start thinking about that. And there is benefit in early on in a densification process of considering that and looking at implementation, but it's not. It's a policy for consideration. And the consideration was a resident exempt zone, which is a geographic area where residents may choose to register their vehicles to an address within the zone. Registered vehicles are exempt from existing on-street parking restrictions. Non-residents are permitted to park within the residential exempt zone, provided they observe the time restrictions. So trying to give residents an opportunity to have longer or overnight parking and have non-residents constrained in when they can use those areas.
Okay, so it's a recommendation. It doesn't commit to that path.
Strictly a recommendation.
If as things advance in our overall thinking of parking and how we do, permit parking for locals or whatever that looks like, there's still room. This just highlights that something of that nature would need to be considered as this moves along. I'm seeing nodding. Do I have that correct?
Yes, exactly. It's as I said, a recommendation, an idea of a tool that could be used to address a concern that had been highlighted, not a commitment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor Herford. Great work. Spent a huge amount of my weekend reading the plan, and that's not a complaint. One of the sections in it has us encourage the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to establish a 70-kilometer-an-hour speed limit along Highway 99 extending north of Dowit. So I have a few questions around this. Is that a recommendation we're looking for 70 Ks in both direction? What's the motivation for this? Do we have data to suggest that this is the thing to do in that stretch?
Thank you. Through the chair. Yeah, great question. And I can see where the question would come from. They're very specific policies, hyper-specific around some, there's actually a suite of maybe 7 or 8 recommendations regarding access to and from the highway and how to address that. Just as context to the question, at the outset of the planning process, one of the things we thought was likely going to be quite an area of concern is increased traffic and in particular access to and from the highway. So some modeling was done by consultants ISL, as we often do for redevelopment where large density is proposed, you do a traffic impact assessment. So some speculative high density scenarios were created for what might come out of a planning process. Just to say, worst case scenario, if a lot of density ends up here, what would this look like? So some speculation on density was created, and that was run through a traffic model where they have little cars moving around and see what the queuing and the impacts are. And then the consultants start generating changes to the network that would allow the service to operate at an acceptable level. And so that suite of improvements came from them. And if you implement those and all of the density were to occur, the flow through the intersections would be considered acceptable. And so you would mitigate the traffic impact of the increased development. We then went to the Ministry of Transportation and held a meeting and said, hey, we've conducted this study. We're looking at potential changes in land use in this area over time. What do you think of these ideas? Ministry of Transportation, one, thanked us because they find it's uncommon to have a community that's along a highway do that level of work ahead of time and engage with them. Often it's incremental and issues build over time, and then we're like, oh my goodness, what do we do? So they said, thank you for the proactive approach. Their response was, this is a set of recommendations that could potentially address this issue. We are not immediately opposed to these. They may also be there may be another set of approaches that could be alternatives to this. And so they said, we're open to this. We should continue this conversation and look as issues or as we see development come, does it occur? Does it come to that level? And we can look at whether these are the right suite or whether the others that are the right suite of options to make changes. We have had another more recent meeting with MOTI to look for more clarity on what the triggers would be or when we would know what they might want to do. They highlight, it was actually just before the election. They said they were in they have a particular term but they have this term like we're in a holding pattern of, so I can't remember the term, and so they weren't able to do a lot there, but they said really the best thing you can do is, do upfront analysis, get into your OCP, advocate for these changes, and that's what moves these processes along. And we were like, that's exactly what we're doing. We're going to continue to work on that, and we've re-engaged for continued conversation. So that's the context. It's kind of a broad suite of changes that would address the issues.
Okay.
That was detailed. Apologies for the rambling.
Interesting. Okay, so I think that probably answers my next one, but I'll throw it out there anyway in case you have additional and different thoughts, because some of the other recommendations caught my eye. Pursue the establishment of a third northbound lane on Highway 99 starting south of Garibaldi Way and extending north to Newport Ridge. And then further down, pursue the establishment of a third northbound lane on Highway 99 starting south of Malcolm Road and extending north to the Garibaldi Village right turn. And again, I'm wondering, like, what's the motivation? I don't necessarily see this particular part of Highway 99 bogged down and congested on a regular basis.
Yeah, through the chair, it's just once you put all of the density that could occur there into the model and start to get congestion, those are the changes that they identified that would alleviate that issue. It would create more flow that could then allow the intersections to operate properly. They're all tuned to make the intersections operate at an acceptable level. The nuances, we'd probably need to get a traffic engineer in here to really speak to them, but it's data driven and specific set that could be used, but aren't necessarily the only ones.
Okay. I want to have one more question, but it's not really a question. It's a comment. So I'll save it for the more appropriate time.
I think that was also a comment, but I think on this piece, just to be clear on you've worked collaboratively with the province on these recommendations. This isn't, so it's not exclusively our team recommending something to the province they have never heard of. This is these recommendations were jointly developed. Is that correct?
Through the chair, there are some pieces. So they also conducted their own corridor study, which it's not a public document, but they said, hey, here's the corridor. Here there are upgrades that will be needed over time. Some of those are reflected in the set of recommendations that ISL put forward. But other of those recommendations are generated by ISL, given their model and their work. But then they were presented back to the ministry to say, okay, here's a complete set of stuff you've proposed and we've proposed, and like, what do you think of this? And as I said, they were open to the idea. They said, this is one potential set of solutions. There could be other sets. We need to continue conversation as we see development occur.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. I've got Councillor Anderson, Pettingill, and then Stoner.
Thank you. Mr. Gunn, the plan takes into account the forthcoming Masheter Creek Overflow Hazard Report, and that has implications for setbacks on Diamond Head Road. Those setbacks, in addition to the laneways that are proposed between, let's see, Tantalus and Glenalder and Diamond Head, and also between Culloden and Diamond Head. We've had, and I'm sure you've heard from property owners concerned about the attenuation of the value of their properties. If they're now going to be, for some, in an unwelcome situation of selling or apprehensive situation. You've no doubt heard and considered these concerns and the options we have for implementing these, and in particular the laneways. Can you give us some summary observations about how we can incentivize our goals, but also alleviate the concerns of these property owners as to the large sections of their property. They're really in an uncertain place. Thank you.
To the chair. Yeah, great question. And actually, something I didn't highlight in the presentation, but that study on the masheter is underway. It's not complete, but it's getting close. And the great news out of that is that the 1 meter FCL that has been put in place as a precautionary principle referencing, a generalized standard, the risk does not warrant that level of FCL. In fact, from the modeling that they've conducted, so they finished doing the modeling, now they're thinking about policies to address it. There's really just a bit of a pulse of water that might come from the masheter and push towards the estates, not a meter of water flowing towards the estates. So there's going to be a dramatic change in the proposed setback. There's 2 policies in there, one if we need the meter and one if we don't need the meter. And we will be going down the pathway of not needing a meter of FCL, which means we don't need a 10-meter setback. That's going to shrink dramatically. And so that policy is getting worked out, but it will be significantly less. So that you've raised a very real concern, loss of property, but based on the technical findings, that's going to be heavily reduced. And then the other piece I would say to that is, in terms of value, when doing some of the design work to determine what maximum FARs are possible, the work that we've done has identified that we are still able to get up to 2.0 FAR, which is a significant amount of density on these properties. And given the reduction in the FCL, even though there are some constraints like the lanes, there's still an ability to get a lot of floor area ratio, or a lot of gross floor area out of those properties, which is what drives the value. So I'm confident that there will be a significant amount of gross floor area that will be able to be developed on these properties.
Thank you very much. My next question concerns various sections of the report which address institutional lots, cultural facilities, churches, CSCs, and ACCs. And I'll try to be concise. The institutional lots, there's 4 of them. 3 of them have been or still are churches. In fact, all 3 have been used as cultural facilities. The one on the corner of Diamond Road was actually proposed for Squamish Music Academy facility at one point. So I think that they should all be reconsidered, but they're discussed in different ways. For example, 6.13 encouraged the development of affordable housing projects on these properties. 6.73 support the continued use of existing institutional spaces as hubs for performing arts. And then finally, under childcare, redevelopment, encouraging childcare. I guess my question, Mr. Gunn, is perhaps because some elements of this have risen from our last discussions here in council, that we might have some kind of a consistent approach for articulating vision for these 3 properties in particular. Is this something that can be considered? Because it looks like we're going in 3 different directions, and that might have implications later for people coming and visiting the plan.
Yeah, through the chair, thank you. Yeah, I think you have highlighted that there are a variety of uses that are supported and encouraged on these properties. The intention of the plan wasn't to choose which should occur on which properties or to be directive. It was intended to create an openness to a range of opportunities and to reflect specifically, for example, the cultural value that was highlighted in the last meeting of council. But I personally feel like creating support for the broad range of these, they're not every use, there are a few specific uses. And to create the support for all of those uses on the properties will then allow those landowners and the community to choose the ones that are most appropriate given the time and the need of the community. So, it's not like we have a massive range of uses. We have a fairly narrow set that seem appropriate for those. And that seemed like the right approach, but I'm open to direction from council if other approaches are desired.
If I may follow up, one of the things that occurred to me in going through on these particular properties is that their role as arts venues is not highlighted under the section 6.11, or is it 6.11, neighborhood amenities. And that might be advantageous to also consider them under that heading, where we're generally discussing parks and other things, childcare. And the reason I suggest this, and my question to you is, would that not be helpful when we come to consider the implementation of an ACC bylaw, excuse me about that acronym, I lost it just now, but that is forthcoming. And should we consider that in this report? And for that purpose, consider that cultural facilities listed under neighborhood amenities, because that's the chapter that we're going to go to in this plan when we come to consider application of an ACC bylaw. And my question really then is the implications of an ACC bylaw, how do we take that into account in this plan, in the text of the plan?
Through the chair. My understanding of the way the ACC bylaw will be driven is that there will be, like a DCC bylaw, a list of projects that are being prioritized and intended to be funded through amenity contributions or amenity amenity cost charges. And so we do have in this plan now a location within the plan where those properties are highlighted for their value as cultural amenities. In the process of developing that list of ACC projects, it doesn't actually matter what part of the plan it comes from. It could come from any part of the plan. There's really going to be processes that ongoing, just like with the DCC project, where staff and council will work to say, these are the priorities for our ACC bylaw. Certainly the way the plan's written, it will be able to be aligned with that, and it will be up to what staff and council advocate for and decide go into that bylaw. So I don't see that the way it's set up will preclude supporting amenities through an ACC bylaw on any of these properties. I think it'll be okay.
Is it appropriate to name an ACC bylaw or the forthcoming bylaw in this plan? We were only discussing really the CAC, current CAC policy.
Yeah, it was largely drafted prior to the ACC bylaw, but we'll be able to take the language that's relevant, that relates to amenities, and bring it into the ACC bylaw. Many of the plans right now speak in the language of CACs, and we'll be looking for that as the place to gather ideas when we're generating those lists. I'm not working on the ACC policy, but certainly the way it's written is not going to preclude the opportunity for inclusion.
Very good. Thank you very much. Mayor Herford, I do have one more question, but I'd be happy to wait if there is time for it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm going to go on to Councillor Pettingill, then Stoner, then Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks. Just getting back to some of the traffic and highway stuff. With our traffic management plan, we're pursuing a significant mode shift as part of our planning. Was that sort of level of mode shift anticipated in the modeling we used here, or were we working from different numbers?
Through the chair, it is the same consultant, ISL, that worked on this traffic plan and the transportation master plan. I think even some of the same staff. And my recollection is there have been points along the way where there's been discussion between myself and the engineering group working on it, saying, hey, let's make sure they're aligned. So I would assume that our assumptions were fairly well aligned. I can't recall and have to go back and probably talk to the consultants. But being the same group, I think the likelihood that alignment was strong is high.
Okay, thanks. That's something that don't need to know right now, but I would like to have some confirmation on, because to me, some of the lane counts and turning lanes and so on is a bit surprising, but maybe it does make sense. So it was mentioned that there's some specificity in some of these things. In my read of this, it did seem when we're getting to FARs and references to CAC policy and so on, it did feel at times that this was dipping into becoming a bylaw, like a zoning bylaw or a CAC policy. And I'm just wondering, is there a reason why we did that as opposed to sort of give some direction to future bylaw and CAC updates versus, we're sort of writing in exclusions and so on right here now? And why did we take that approach?
Through the chair, it's a good question. Often, the first thing I'd say is this is an OCP document, and there's really broad discretion for council to adopt an OCP that they think has the right level of detail. A neighborhood plan tends to dive deeper and pull in more specific information, but it is not regulatory. It provides the policy language that the regulatory document, when developed, has the opportunity to look to and incorporate. not bound to, but can use to inform the development of regulations. So when we go to do zoning amendments, if we're implementing as outlined in the plan, there are specific zones that we would want to apply. The plan, because there's a bunch of engagement and thought that's been done through the process, it's an opportunity to try and resolve some issues, but not commit to them, and provide that direction to the process where they are implemented. So it's trying to balance the high level vision, but knowing that there's work that's going to need to be done to put things in place and to draw on the thought that's conducted as part of the process. It's a bit of a balance of both. It's the neighborhood plan's a bit of an in-between in terms of what level of detail you want from high level and actual regulatory, at least the way that it's been presented. But of course, it's at the discretion of council.
So, but my understanding is if we sort of mention specific FARs, for example, in the OCP, rather than say a medium FAR, when we come to update a zoning bylaw, we can't we have to stick to what the OCP says. We can't, without amending the OCP, have an updated bylaw be contrary to the OCP. Is that correct?
Through the chair, this does get into a bit of I think case law, and my understanding is that for a zoning bylaw, I have to remember the term, but there's a term that it has to be in like direct conflict with. And so my understanding, you're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that there is some flexibility if it seems that they're aligned in terms of the goals. There's a broad set of goals and intentions in the neighborhood plan, and my understanding is that bar is quite high in terms of to find that direct conflict that would have to occur between the zoning and the OCP. And my guess is that the policies could be seen as providing guidance, but providing some opportunity for wiggle room. Now, some of them, like the FARs that are established, for example, like the FARs are quite a specific piece, and I'd say that's one where we probably would need to think more and probably look for more advice if we wanted to vary outside of those. But things like how big are the intended frontages and intended setbacks. I think there'd probably be more opportunity for consideration that it's still in alignment, even if there's some variance. Do you want to add to that? Do you have any thoughts on it? It's quite a specific.
It is through the mayor for the floor area ratios within the official community plan. Council does have authority to approve a zoning bylaw that went in excess of that floor area ratio, as long as it was generally aligned with the policies within the OCP and the land use designation.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question I had, just a little bit related, but because there are references to CAC policy, and this does, we get into sort of incentivizing and doing things that we will be trying to do with ACCs as well. Does this set up critical timing of when we approve this versus our ACCs versus our CAC policy update versus a zoning bylaw update? Like, is there a real synchronization that has to happen here?
Yeah, through the mayor. So that's a question that actually came up in a few different project areas for the district as these new legislative changes have come forward, because we don't want to end up, I think what you're highlighting is we don't want to end up in a situation where things get pre-zoned and the amenity policies have changed and we miss opportunities. So I think specific to this situation, the main points are that we have an ACC bylaw that's under development, and I think it's coming for, I think that right now the intention is to bring it forward in the next few months for consideration of by council. It could take some more time, but then the timing of the neighborhood plan, right now we're just doing the OCP level policy. Following that, there is implementation recommendations to implement some zoning, but before we do that, we want to complete a study of the sewer and water infrastructure and the storm and street design. And those projects are underway, but will take some time. I don't think that there's much chance those projects and implementation of zoning will move faster than the ACC bylaw. And I think we'll have an ACC bylaw well in advance of us putting zoning in place. As far as development applications coming in, I suspect that staff will say, hey, thanks for the development application. We want to finish these infrastructure project studies before we move this forward. Those are going to be critical pieces of information.
Okay, thank you. I do have more questions, but I'll let my colleagues take a turn.
Thank you for that. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. Mr. Gunn, the first word that you were looking for was interregnum, but I don't know what the second word was on the legal side.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it.
The Councillor Anderson asked my question around ACCs. My other question was around if you could elaborate a little bit more on the SD 48 response, especially vis-a-vis our childcare projections, especially just for this one given area. It feels like it's disjointed. So can you speak to that a little bit, please?
Yeah, this is really fascinating. I've had 2 conversations now with SD48 over this process. We went to them early in the process to talk about neighborhood plans in general because there were multiple plans going on. And then we had a more detailed discussion about this plan recently. And so the information I'll give you is more specific to their experiences with development and building schools. They have a set of projections that are completed by a consultant, Berger, that outlines what they expect to need for space for students in schools in all the communities in BC. When we were working on our OCP, we had looked at those and said to them, hey, we see a lot more development coming, and your projections don't seem to align with what we see for all the development that's coming. They had heard that here. They'd also heard it in Whistler. This is a bit of a story. I'll try and make it quick. In Whistler, they started work on a new middle school to accommodate what they saw as a lot of growth coming. And they went for a number of years down that process, commitments to planning and I think actually even getting a site. What started happening is that the projections that they had from the province ran accurate, and the concern around more children showing up seemed to be overstated. And they kept going for a couple of years, and eventually that project has been pulled. So there's been money spent on a project in Whistler that was halted because even though a lot of development was coming, what they've been finding is that the people coming are not having the number of children that you would expect to create the higher level of demand for schools. And they're finding the same thing in Squamish, just to bring it back to us. We have a lot of development occurring, but they're finding that for the level of development, they are not finding that there are as many school-age children coming as they would expect. And the projections that have been done by Berger have continued to be accurate for them. Speculation, they think that probably the people that are coming here, like the cost of living here is high enough that young families are less likely to come here. In other parts of the province, Langford, Surrey, they just can't build schools fast enough. And as soon as they build, they're full. But here, we do have a bulge going through middle school right now of students. So Don Ross is at capacity, but behind that, the school age population is lower, and they don't expect to need more schools. The referral response they gave us was short. It just said, hey, we see, I think like steady or consistent school age population, but they actually, in discussion, there is a bulge going through. They actually think there may be a declining school age population on the backside of that bulge. And they think it's because it's really hard for young families to move to towns with really high living costs. So net result, they do not see a need for more school space. They also actually have a lot of land for that if they need it, but more classroom space is not something they see needing out into the future at this time.
That's really fascinating. Thanks for the additional context and the mismatch between our current experience and the expected future lived experience. So that's really helpful. I guess I'm going to pull that back to the Garibaldi Estates neighborhood plan. How do we see that translating to our childcare projection needs? We haven't seen that same experience in childcare. And so is that just because there's already such a deficit?
Through the chair, This I have not dealt. I feel like we could have one of my colleagues, Sarah, would be able to maybe better tackle this question. I would guess probably we just have a fundamentally undersupply of childcare spaces. So it's below the threshold. The school has enough there above the threshold. I would assume, are below the threshold. Just on the childcare topic in this plan, we've tried to set an access rate that is even higher than the previous access rate we have contemplated. And behind the scenes, thinking about the locations that could support a large childcare, we do think there's an opportunity in the neighborhood as a larger development comes through. That's going to be a priority for that location. I do think we have opportunity, and we've tried to establish an access rate that is a stretch goal in the plan to reflect that.
Okay, that's helpful. My other question was just on the parcels that are just off of Tantalus north of Cheakamus Way. They're included in the commercial core, which just feels like a little bit disjointed. Like the ones just south of Commercial Way are mixed use residential C. And so I'm just curious why we've identified those two specific parcels as commercial only, if that's based on like current uses or if there's future opportunity there.
Can you repeat which? Just north, right? Okay. Are you talking about the crematorium?
The crematorium and the Talus lot.
Right. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So they are isolated. This largely falls back to the rationale for not including apartments in the commercial core area along the highway. We do have quite a bit of opportunity for apartments across this area. We've got a lot of area for ground-oriented townhouses. What I see the Garibaldi Estates having that many other areas in the community don't have is pure commercial land. We don't have very much across the community of just pure commercial land. I think it's very easy at any point to move that to a mixed use in the future, but it's quite hard to get stuff back to pure commercial. And so largely the areas that are in gray on this map that are pure commercial, we're trying to create essentially a reserve of pure commercial. If there ever is demand for office at any scale, we're not going to have a ton of place to put it unless we hold on to some of those pure commercial zones. So essentially trying to set it as a reserve. Yeah, that is the rationale. The demand for apartment space doesn't feel as high as we may have for commercial in the future. And the conversion is easy in the other direction.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks very much. A couple of my questions have been sort of answered, and a couple of my questions are, I sort of have half questions here. So first, I'd like to understand, so one of the things that struck out to me was this idea of the setbacks on Diamond Head Road and the 1 meter FCL. Do I understand correctly now that, and apologize if this was in the report and I missed it, that it's not certain that there will be a 1 meter FCL required along Diamond Head Road? Is that correct?
Yeah, through the chair, it's not in the staff report because we don't have a finished report from the study that's underway. But I can tell you that yes, the modeling does not show a 1 meter FCL necessary. In fact, it's much lower or not at all. So that setback will not be needed. The setback was really to make accessible ramps possible, and we will not need anywhere near that level.
Okay. So basically page 20 of the report that talks about the overland flow hazard would just be deleted. So I'm wondering, how do we move forward tonight? In my mind, that's a pretty important piece of how this develops. I struggle to see how Diamond Head Road can develop in the way that we foresee. Things like having activated pedestrian streetscape adjacent to retail is not possible when you've got a 10 meter setback between the streetscape and the residential and a 1 meter height differential, right? That just that sense of activation is going to fundamentally change. So if we approve this, if we move forward with this tonight, it then needs to be edited to remove the overflow. So I'm just trying to understand how to move forward with this, given in my mind, this is a big piece of of the character of this neighborhood.
Yeah, through the chair, thank you. You highlighted something that has kept me up at night, literally. Like this need to balance, or the desire to balance, this pedestrian realm and the flood hazard has been definitely a stressor. So the plan is drafted in a way that it has policy for both directions. So the plan can be approved, in my mind, and it has policy that runs in alignment with if we get a study back that says we don't need the 1 FCL, here's the pathway to take, that we look at reductions in that 10-meter and design a road frontage that accommodates what we're looking for. So it has essentially a choose your own adventure type structure where if this, that, if that, this, right? So there's options within there. There's stuff that needs to be done. We need to figure out what the total sewer, water, storm capacity requirements are, and then feed that into the design of a road profile. And that information, really, we want to have a sense of what the densities are going to be so that we know what infrastructure requirements are. So there's a sequence of steps that had to be taken to say, okay, here's what the ultimate design is going to be. And that detail, we've set up the plan in a way that says, hey, here's what we're going to do. We really need to get to a level of certainty before we spend all that money and finish that work. And the plan is set up to say, here's the pathway forward to resolve those questions. There are outstanding questions, and that's what you're highlighting, but the plan sets up the sequence of how to answer those questions.
Okay, I guess the piece I'm struggling with is seeing the plan come to a fruition. That the thing that's been keeping you up at night is the thing I don't see how we can have an activated pedestrian zone next to next to retail, which I think is what we have a vision for there, somewhere where you can walk down the street, pop into like Cleveland Avenue, right? I don't see that even being possible with a 1 meter difference between a 1 meter vertical and a 10-meter horizontal difference between the sidewalk and the retail. So that's not a question, that's a concern that I'd like to understand a path forward for. Perfectly happy to go forward if the overflow flood hazard isn't a problem, but I don't want to approve a plan where we find out in 6 weeks that the overland flood hazard is a problem, and we're stuck with this huge setback, 1 meter elevation.
Yeah, through the chair. So the reason it is challenging is how do we get that access ramp? And it does have a disconnection. There is a way to do it, and we see that like we actually have in town, if you go north along Tantalus, it's a compromised pedestrian realm, and you could make it bigger. But you have these elevated pedestrian areas, which is separated. Essentially, the reason I felt stressed over it is that it's not as attractive an outcome as if you don't have to have that separation. It's possible. And if you go to the Whistler Village and walk through, you see that where there's like the pedestrian area, and then there's a set of walkways along the storefronts that are elevated and behind some raised, they've got covering. It's just not as nice, but it is possible. But the good news is we do not have a 1 meter FCL. We will not have a 1 meter FCL. So that's the great news. So then don't have to stress about that. There's going to be something, but it's going to be much less significant.
Okay, I'll put that. Yeah, great. I'll put that away, and just hope that it comes out that way. I was looking at the sidewalks and bike lanes and active transportation networks. Great vision. And I look back at the transportation master plan that was recently approved, and it looks like the bike lanes are there in the short term and medium term transportation master plan. but I didn't see sidewalks anywhere in the transportation master plan. I think it's just not part of that piece of work. So where would the sidewalks, the cost of that sidewalks, all the sidewalks in that, that's a non-trivial cost. I mean, I would ballpark that in the $20 million range based on the price of the recent Perth Drive sidewalk. How is that cost accounted for? How do we do that? Because parcel by parcel, I don't see parcel by parcel working here because there's too many parcels.
Yeah, through the chair. This is another one of the challenges of infill development. Absolutely accurate comment that there's a lot of area identified for sidewalks. One of the elements of the plan is that if you'll look at the active transportation plan, there's dashed sidewalks and then continuous sidewalks. The continuous sidewalks are intended to be the higher priorities. The dashed, that's a long-term, could be, very long-term to achieve those. The ones that have the solid lines, those are largely the streets that we're getting as part of this investigation into the infrastructure studies that are going on, that we're getting street profiles created. And one of the tasks for the consultant is to come up with designs that accommodate for the incremental nature of development, looking at opportunities for, if we have a project that comes in and something gets built, are there opportunities to build something in a way that can integrate with what's nearby, unbuilt, and incrementally have pieces built over time? Likely we'll have pieces of infrastructure that are isolated as they're built over time. That is yet to be determined, because that question is, we always have the opportunity of getting, what do you call it? In lieu, cash in lieu, which can be put in a pool, but then of course over time that money degrades due to inflation, so there is a desire to utilize it. So we're looking, the most likely outcome is that we'll have isolated infrastructure that gets built as developments occur, but if we have larger stretches and there's considerable amount of uptake in the redevelopment, over time we'll get these segments put together, and then there may be smaller parts that need to be addressed later on.
Can that sidewalk infrastructure go into the ACC pool or not?
I think it's in the
or
DCC.
DCC.
Yeah. So I think the cost of those can come from DCCs for doing those works. Now, of course, the DCC bylaw will be heavily subscribed by many items, and so it'll be a matter of where it gets in the priority list. But yeah, I think they can go into the DCC bylaw. Yes.
So one of the things, so in supporting the neighborhood plan, one of the things I'd like to make sure is that we have the funding mechanisms to make the plan happen. And right now I'm not seeing the whole funding plan. I'm not seeing things really come together, because, so what can we do to make sure that we've got the bylaws in place, be the ACC bylaws, DCC bylaws, CACs, which are going to be presumably going away? How can we be sure that we have all of those in place at a sufficient level to make the plan happen and not get sort of halfway into a neighborhood with half a sidewalk here and half a sidewalk there, and then have to spend $20 million to finish it off?
To the chair, did you want to tackle it? I'll take a step.
Sure.
To the chair, I think this is one of the fundamental challenges of change over time, and I don't know that there's an easy answer to say that this is the pathway where it's predictably resulting in perfect outcome for that particular piece of it. I think, like a number of things in a town like ours where there's change occurring, there are awkward stages through redevelopment that can persist over time. And something like sidewalks is particularly hard because it's very expensive to put into place. And you don't get a whole string of houses redeveloping along a street at a given time. So I think the answer is you have to take a very long view if you want to have change and hope for an outcome that is the best possible outcome over the long haul, you have to accept long time frames.
Would it be possible to put in this plan a list, and I don't need a budget number attached to it, because I know that that's a big ask to put how much are those sidewalks going to cost, and that's going to be a completely different price in 10 years time. But a list of things whose funding needs to come from somewhere. Sidewalks jump out at me. And so that we can then, as we go through and update the DCC bylaw, we can say, okay, well, in the Garibaldi Estates neighborhood plan, the sidewalks were identified as potentially coming from DCCs, and therefore we really need to have them there, because I have some concern that in this meeting we sit and we think, okay, yeah, that could maybe go into the DCC bylaw, but then when we come to the DCC bylaw, it slips off the table, right? It doesn't come to mind. So is there a way we can make sure that we understand where all of the pieces are supposed to come from, even if we don't ascribe them there now?
I think through the chair, what we could do is we could, it's a good idea, and apologies that we haven't incorporated that in. I think that is a thoughtful approach. And we could say here are a bunch of elements that have cost associated with them and some potential sources. I think it would be hard to say this is where that's going to come from, because you have to leave the discretion to future councils, and councils will use a variety of tools and choices and prioritize things in different manners. You could identify some potential sources. The one thing I would say is that vision documents like this are vision documents. They tend to think big, and there are many things in this plan that have, lots of ideas of things that we may want to provide support for. But it will take long periods of time with commitment to achieve, and it may be that elements are achieved readily and other elements are hard to achieve, and so certainly I think we could identify a number of them. I don't know if it'd be worth going through every single element. It might be worth prioritizing the key elements and identify potential sources of funding for them.
Yep, go ahead.
Thanks very much. Was so this has a lot of water work, a lot of sewer and water infrastructure work planned or looking at. Was that included in the water master plan that we recently saw, or is this work on top of the water master plan?
Through the chair, are we talking about the storm master plan or the water master plan?
The water master plan.
The water master plan. So let me think here now. So with those master plans, what typically happens is there's an initial question. There in the initial stages, there's a question to planning. Please present what the future of this area that's under consideration is looked at in terms of employees and dwelling units and the types of dwelling units. And so depending on when that project's initiated, we've over time created some different scenarios. Sometimes the consultants create those scenarios, but more recently planning's been helping by providing that input. And so I'd have to go and look. I certainly know for the sewer plan, which is underway right now, the storm plan, they're using an updated model that has the development proposed for the Garibaldi Estates. I'd have to go and ask what the baseline is, but these master plans, they are intended to reflect all of the knowledge that we have for what is coming. And so there has been models of what intended development will be that feeds them. I'd have to look at the water one. We will have even more robust information moving forward, where we have really good information that is consistent for all these master planning activities. But the intention is, yes, that it reflects the development that's been approved for consideration.
So as a comment, the question ties into a question I asked during the recent ACC DCC bylaw conversation, which was, can we please see the list of projects that are included in these ACC and DCC bylaws? Because that gives us the tools to really say, yes, we understand where this funding might come from. Yeah, I don't feel comfortable supporting a vision if I don't have any mechanism I don't understand the mechanisms by which we want to fund that vision,
Mhm.
it's just hypothetical. So yeah, I'd like clearer vision, clearer idea of how we're going to achieve the budget to make it happen.
Fair enough.
Maybe that and pick up the line of questioning and try to address this. I think I have similar sort of concerns and see that there's still some unanswered questions, although this has obviously gone down into as much detail as possible. But I view that as subsequent work where we put an informed, as well-informed decision as possible on the day. Perhaps this is the day. And going forward, some of these questions now we sort of know what we're solving, more specifically what we're solving for, and those plans can be developed to reflect that better. And I get that there's an interplay of those where having more details is helpful in the actual end execution, but it's sort of a chicken and an egg piece. So now that if this plan was advanced, then subsequent plans would incorporate, or subsequent master plans and so on projects would incorporate what we're seeing here and aim to address those funding issues and whatever other pinch points there are. Is that sort of a correct sort of order of operation? Because we're doing work in so many areas at one time that I could see it's hard to sort of sequence this in a more perfect way.
Yes. So another good comment. What I have learned going through this process in particular is there's always a piece of information that you wish you had already. And the way we've tackled this is let's figure out the land uses, then let's do the infrastructure plan based on those land uses, which we have enough confidence that the land uses probably won't change. And so we're running those specific infrastructure plans for this particular region. And then those feed into the master planning process. And I think what you're saying is that there's this whole kind of cycle that continues because you're continually having new information about what's coming in any given area. And so even though you'd like to have all that information, it actually is never stopping. Everything's evolving continually. And so you have to say, well, let's take our best information we have, let's feed it into that and figure out what our master plan says we need to do. And then we keep feeding that loop of information with our best knowledge about what's coming down the pipe. So yeah, I think there's a continual process of like trying to identify what's needed, what's coming, and how we're going to pay for it. And so to your question, we haven't like solved the question of how we're going to pay for it for a bunch of these things. We're trying to be diligent in saying, let's make sure we know what it is. Let's have that available to feed into the process. But infrastructure is expensive, and I can see why there would be concerns about like, well, what does that mean? I'd like that resolved.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to go around the room to see if there's any other questions. We've been on this for a little bit, so I'm trying to get us somewhere. Councillor Anderson next.
Thank you. If things go according to plan, there could be a substantial amount of transition in building stock in this area. In other words, potential demolition. And so one of the policies that, Mr. Gunn, that you've introduced in the current version of the plan is as follows under 6.1.3, diverse housing, is the implementation of policy recommendations included in the District Deconstruction and Demolition Report 2021 is encouraged to mitigate deconstruction and demolition impacts associated with infill development. My first question regarding that policy statement is whether it might better be located under Energy and Climate Change 6.9.3, which discusses other construction and building materials strategies. Maybe something for you to consider if that's possible. It really does kind of look like that would be a better place for it.
Through the chair, thank you for that suggestion.
My second question regarding the policy statement is the reference to the District Deconstruction and Demolition Report 2021. Just to be clear, because since that's this report here by Lighthouse Consultancy, and based on that report, a bylaw was devised, which emphasizes one of the recommendations in that report was to pursue a volume-based strategy, or that's basically the focus or the tactic in our bylaw. Would you otherwise refer to the bylaw, or is it that report that you were referring to, the Lighthouse Consultancy report? Is it necessary to be specific? I'm not sure, but the reader might be confused as to whether you're referring to the bylaw or the background report for the bylaw.
Through the chair, I think what we're trying to do there is highlight that it's an important issue that needs consideration. I think these policies generally are addressed at a higher level, whether it be a broad policy across the community or a regulatory bylaw that applies across the community. And I think we're just trying to connect dots to highlight that that's something that's going to need to be considered at the relevant point. So I think pointing in the direction, my feeling was that it was the appropriate approach, but open to suggestions.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. A couple things. There's been some community conversations about co-housing, and from a presentation a couple weeks ago, I think my understanding was if a structure has a single kitchen, we don't really have mechanisms to determine whether that's sort of several tenancies or if it's a large multi-generational family and so on. But the OCP talks about co-housing and exemptions or incentives related to that. And I'm just wondering sort of what we mean in this context by co-housing and how we sort of ensure it is co-housing, not just in the short term, but in the long term, especially if we're giving incentives or exceptions in certain cases.
Through the chair, the policies that are living in this document around co-housing reflect some engagement. There are co-housing societies in the Lower Mainland that have created successful communities of people that live together and know each other better and have a shared experience. And so these policies are specific to the input they've provided. I think co-housing is a term that's used to describe a variety of approaches to living together, and we see different approaches like that in the community. There's this kind of particular one that we've had input from that this is reflective of. Your question about are we going to give up something that like give away some exemptions that and not get the value out of it from co-housing? I think it's a relevant one. It's one that I've talked to these co-housing advocates about. One of the things they've highlighted is co-housing isn't actually a particular legal structure or a defined regulated aspect. One of the examples said is you can build a co-housing facility that has many elements that are there to help facilitate incidental interaction. It's one of the biggest pieces of it is help incidental interaction, so people get to know each other. And you can design buildings that are going to do that, but the actual running of a co-housing project as being used here takes an intention from a group of people to live together. And so the idea here is to have some requirements and some benefits that can facilitate that. One of them is this big kitchen space where you can build and all sit together. They've said 60% of the people need to be able to sit together and eat together. And that allows people to get to know each other. Having bigger areas where people bump into each other in the hallways or the stairs, they get to know each other. All of these things are pieces that can facilitate that intention to live together. But ultimately, people can choose not to do that. And so in a way, we are giving something, but the requirements are that they get used in that way that help incidental interaction. And presumably, whether you're intending to live together or not, that still has some benefit. But ultimately, it will be up to those individuals choosing to live that way and managing their property in their way. So, and you can't really regulate that. It's essentially the housing advocates I talked to who work on this said, this is fantastic. We'd love to try. You might get a project like that shows up. But once that building's built, you can't actually hold people to deciding to live intentionally as a co-housing unit. It's up to the individual. So there is a bit of a risk there, but the downside doesn't seem particularly heinous.
Okay, thanks. I have two small things. I think so. 5.5.6 talks about in the ground-oriented residential area policies. Number 5 talks about a minimum frontage of 40 meters for townhomes. And I just wanted to, understand that correct, or why? What's the rationale behind that?
Yeah, to the chair. That, and I think I'd seen a pre-question, was that a setback or is that a width? It's a width. It's a width to try and bring multiple properties to encourage consolidation. These properties are long and narrow, and with the structures that we're going to want to see built here, if we get consolidation, we'll get better utilization, more efficient utilization of the space, and better outcomes for the design. And so that's setting a minimum. It's essentially saying you've got to take two of those lots and put them together. We'd hope that maybe even three could come together at times, but it's saying you can't just do one. We want to see some consolidation.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing, 19 in the same section, talks about some dedication of agriculture, green space, or park in exchange for offsetting some CAC. But it was missing in my mind a public qualifier. And I think there's a few other places where we talk about park and so on. Do we always mean public, or is that something we need to say explicitly?
This aligns with some of the policy in the CAC policy, and yes, it would have to be a public space to benefit from that consideration of value when looking at the CAC package.
Okay, and then I think the last one for now, and I'm still hung up a bit about some of the specificity, and I guess one of my concerns, and I'm looking to see if you can alleviate them, is that if we're too specific about FAR or number of lanes or certain things like this, do we increase the odds that people will need an OCP amendment because we can't handle it in a policy or a bylaw, and therefore we're into more public hearings, which a lot of the SSMUH regulations were meant to avoid? And so if we sort of stay a bit higher level in the OCP and put this specificity in the bylaws and so on, do we sort of help keep with that efficiency that we're trying to achieve?
Through the chair, just for a clarifying question, is your concern that more FAR than is currently permitted may be desirable and that we are creating a constraint? Is that the question? Because it depends on which element we're trying to be specific about as to whether or not it could be a trip or not, or a challenge.
Yeah, it just seems that it's not uncommon to have variances or rezonings, and there's just things we didn't think of when we want to adjust. And so when I see very specific, objective, hard numbers in an OCP, or exemptions to CAC policies, which maybe aren't written yet, I start to worry, like, ooh, are we doing the right things in the right place? Like, should this stay a little more subjective at this level?
Okay. Yeah, through the chair. So I think I could break down what you're talking about into two categories. One are the pieces that I think would be specific numbers that pertain to zoning, where you could conceive of there may be this direct conflict between the zoning and OCP bylaw. I think the most readily is OC, or the most significant would be OCP, but Jesse has highlighted that you do have the flexibility to go past FAR boundaries. And to be honest, from our design work, it's going to be hard to go past those FAR boundaries because parking is going to be the determinant here of these building sizes. Most of the other piece that you've been talking about, like CAC, that's all policy language. And I think it's we wouldn't see that legislated conflict, or the conflict that is spoken about in legislation, if we have policies but choose to go in a different direction with the actual regulations or choices in development. So I don't see there being variances. Really are more like you've got a zoning bylaw that's a regulation and you want to be outside of that. Here we have, I think, more flexibility to either policies ignore or look at other ways to say we have alignment with some of the more specific like FAR numbers.
One more, and then I'd like to start wrapping our minds around the decision we're being asked for tonight.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, sorry, I missed this in my notes. So if I read the diagrams correctly, I didn't see bike lanes on all the streets. Now, does the references to the bike lanes in some of the maps, is that sort of only separated raised bike lanes, and would we anticipate at the very least painted bike lanes everywhere? Or I'm just wondering if you can speak to that.
Yeah, through the chair. Those are So your question about is it raised or painted? That's a specific piece of how we would implement that we would try to address at that next stage when we're doing the street design. What we're trying to do is where do we want to have routes that are comfortable places for people to use their bike and have some level of distinction and designation for that use that we could put into our plan and say, these are the routes how we connect from here to here and here to there. How that gets actually built out and designed is another question to come at a later point, and it has to do with the cost and the space and what's involved. But these are really trying to say, where do we want them, not the specificity of what they're going to look like exactly. There are some little drawings in there, but they're strictly to say what is going to be in there, not exactly what those elements would look like. That's a later piece to sort of.
So just to follow up, I guess in my thought process at this day and age, we would want to plan for bike lanes on every street. And I understand it may not be arrays separated on every street, but so is there a reason why at this point we wouldn't be sort of expecting at least some sort of bike infrastructure on every road?
I will say that these policies were developed with the transportation team. And while I'm married to one of them, I don't know everything that the rationale for it. So I did to me, said, hey, transportation team, what do you think we should do? Where should be these? I think your question is maybe at a level that I don't quite have the knowledge on. I certainly know that this is like consistent with what they think are the appropriate bike routes to identify within the plan, but I'm not sure about the rationale for not including them on all the streets. I know that what they're doing is trying to make sure they have good lanes through the neighborhood on the critical areas.
And further to that, I think that this project will also live inside the whole entire ecosystem of our regulations for the community. And as we're looking at consideration of speed limit reduction and so on, we're effectively turning a lot of these places could be considered what's a neighborhood way now through speed limit adjustments and so on, which are things that we are considering or will need to grapple with more broadly across the community. So that's what gives me comfort in this space on that concern. It's just not everything's going to be captured in this document, but it doesn't mean it's not going to be captured in regulation or intent as we move forward. At least that's how I'm viewing, how I'm rationalizing this. So council, we've given this a lot of, I wanted to give this as much space as we as possible, but I think we're down to the point now where we need to consider the recommendations. Really, the first few are I'm viewing as quite procedural, and really it's the big piece is the fourth item is consideration of first and second reading. We've heard some comments, and I'm wondering if this can all go together as it sits, or an alternative. And the lowest alternative is one reading with clear tasks. So I'll go around. Go ahead, Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks. One of my decision points here is the concern of the FCL. We know that raising the FCL can have phenomenal consequences on the cost of building. And so how long, and I noticed that there's a budget sort of line item for this, the Masher flood hazard. How long will that take if we were to, I would feel more comfortable moving forward with second reading on this if we had that and we could be conclusive about where this is going. How long will that take?
Through the chair, I believe it will not, I think early in the new year, we will actually have a document that they will hand to us and say, okay, we've got a completed document. So I'd say January, February is probably a timeline for having that finished report. Like, as I said, they've already completed the model. They've already run it and said, where's the water going? How much water is going? That has been completed. So there isn't a surprise coming in terms of, oh, there's actually more water. They've said there's not going to be a 1 meter FCL. There's going to be some way to try and handle if there might be a pulse. But
so on that point, the recommendation is for 2 readings, and then there would be a public hearing on this. Do you see these things aligning before the public? Is that something that would happen prior to the public hearing? Do you think, so that we can be clear with the public what the actual recommendation is? I like your analogy of the choose your own adventure, but will we be able to close the loop on that prior to public hearing? Because we're hearing it's perhaps a decision point for council, and I don't want to have to do anything strange procedurally to accommodate that.
Yeah, I think there's a chance we'll have that before, like, I think if we get second reading here, we have tentatively identified a date and near the end of January. It's quite possible that that report would be done, but I would have to talk to the consultant. I know they're plugging away at it. I've got a meeting with them tomorrow. I don't know the exact finish date of that, and whether that would be in advance of the public hearing or not.
Just thinking about receiving additional information following a
Afterwards.
public hearing. This is my risk that it's becoming clear here, but yeah, go ahead.
A question of clarity in the process. Can we add, so if we give second reading here, can we then change it and put that out to public hearing? Or the thing that goes out to public hearing needs to be the thing we approve at second hearing, right?
That is
Second reading.
correct.
So I don't understand how we can give second reading, apply some changes, and then go to public hearing. That process, I don't understand how we could do that.
I think that the nature of the choose your own adventure aspect of this plays into the equation here, but I want to look to our corporate officer to keep us on side with that. So I'm going to go to Councillor Stoner just to round out for some comments and see where we're headed here. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. Just on this topic, given the preliminary information that we have from the flood consultant, are staff expecting to make substantive changes to the Garibaldi Estates neighborhood plan in the sections that have been identified by Councillor Hamilton? Or how are staff planning to incorporate that information going forward?
Through the chair, the plan is drafted in a way that no changes are required to move forward from the staff recommendation moving forward. I'm understanding there's some questions from council as to whether or not that is an appropriate method, but the plan is written to say, if this situation occurs, you need a 1 meter FCL, you need to pursue, and in the implementation, consider how that's done. If there is not an FCL, there's policy that says then pursue this pathway, which involves, when creating the street design, reduction of the setback. So the plan policies do not need to be changed based on the input of the Masheter study.
Can I just follow up on that, where page 20 of the plan has quite prescriptive language? It states that the area has been designated as overflow. In the overflow hazard area, future development will be governed by a requirement of a flood construction level of 1 meter. And so I guess the challenge of just like that prescriptive language on that page vis-a-vis what you just said.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think the policies that are specific to the setbacks are embedded in the mixed use sections. You're right that that policy probably would be ideal not to have in there if we have a change, but we often have evolving knowledge on policies, and as new information comes in, we work with that information. That piece will not be prescriptive in the implementation of the zoning. We would then consider we've got new information which supersedes that.
Yeah, I think it comes down to whether one of the options, should it come to pass, which feels like a low likelihood, is palatable, and whether that's a risk to take. But I think that might be, yeah, I think we flesh that out as far as possible. So whether that warrants first reading and waiting for that before advancing, or whether we proceed, I sort of see that as our as our choices here. I'm looking to council for feedback on that or for someone willing to step forward with a motion. Go ahead.
I'd like to propose the first three of the 3 points of the recommendation and then consider the fourth separately. Does that sound like a good idea?
Sure, those seem easier than the fourth one. So look to our corporate officer. That's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so
Right, so
Councillor
I'll-
Hamilton's moving the first three recommendations and Councillor French is seconding. Any comments on this particular piece? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Councillor Greenlaw opposes. Motion carries. All right, we've got number 4 left. Councillor Hamilton. Oh, Councillor Stoner. Sorry, I'll go to Councillor Stoner first.
I was going to move the fourth item as presented in the staff report for 2 readings.
Okay, is there a seconder for that at this time? Councillor Anderson, are you seconding that? Okay, would you like to speak to it, Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, thank you through the chair. While I appreciate that there's some hesitancy from my council colleagues to move this forward by 2 readings at this time, rereading the language on the actual policy components around the FCL, I do think are fluid enough to give us the flexibility to not require, you like that pun, the setbacks if that 1 meter flood construction level is not required. And so I appreciate that it's not ideal that there is a page in there that speaks about the overland hazard. But as our staff have mentioned, the planning cycle is always evolving. And this one in particular has taken 4 years and has tried really hard to incorporate the changes that have happened over that 4-year period. And we know it's not ever going to be perfect. And so my hesitation in moving this only to 1 reading to then incorporate something else is we continue to drag this process out. I think that there has been a lot of effort by both our staff, our council, and most importantly, our community to engage on this. And I think it's time to put it forward to public hearing and to hear from folks in that venue and through that mechanism.
Oh, we've just lost your audio, Councillor Stoner. Not yet. I'm looking to our staff here to see if they can help you at all. I think, hold on 1 second. I'm just going to check process. I think we might need to recess here to get that addressed.
I have to look at our procedure by law.
I think what I'd like to do, what I'm going to call the discretion of the chair, I'd like to recess for 5 minutes to see if we can address this technical issue to ensure that the folks participating remotely can fully participate. So we'll give that time. So 5-minute recess and we'll be back with where we are. So see you back then. understand we can hear you again?
Thank you. I think so.
Yes, we can. So I'll let you finish off your comments. If I don't know if you, I know you're sort of stream of consciousness there at some point, but if you have any comments you'd like to add, now would be the time, and we'll go. Otherwise, I'll go to my speakers list.
Yeah, I think I was close to wrapping up and just gonna finish by saying that it's a challenging place to be in when we do these high level visioning documents and planning documents, because we want to have more information in all the detail, and that's just not always possible. It's actually one of the reasons why I was interested in running for council in the first place, is that I was involved in developing OCP 2040 with a number of the public engagement pieces. And I was really curious how you move a project or a plan of that scale into implementation. And there's a lot of unknowns, and that's the case with this document as well. But I think it sets out a good vision that is well balanced with a lot of the feedback from our community. And so I think it's ready to go to public hearing as is. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I've got Councillor Anderson, then Hamilton.
Yes, also speaking in support of the motion on the floor and in support of Councillor Stoner's remarks, as well as a remark made by our Matt Gunn, that is evolving knowledge on policies, quote unquote. One of the fields where we have evolving knowledge and experience is one I mentioned is demolition and avoiding sending building materials to the landfill. One of the things that we're missing and working our way towards is mechanisms to incentivize conversations and alignment of schedules between deconstruction and dismantling recycling contractors and developers. We are still seeing a lot of buildings being smashed up. This area, the Garibaldi Estates, can be an arena for innovation in this regard, and it's an important one. We're transitioning from a building stock which isn't all that old and very typically contains valuable and reusable building materials. So I'd welcome also my audience here, and these remarks is our solid waste team, and I know that they're on board for this, but we can work harder and use the opportunity of this plan to educate all stakeholders in better treatment of building stock in transition. I'm also just wanted to mention that I'm very happy to hear from Mr. Gunn about the prospect of a new park at the southeast portion of the plan area. That's a welcome kind of bit of news towards the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks very much. I won't be supporting the motion on the floor because I'm at this point, so Councillor Stoner's comment about these a very high level document, I am absolutely in agreement with the overarching vision of this neighborhood plan. There's no question about that. The question for me here is, what is the right level of information? See what I did there? For the flood control level. This to me is, it fundamentally changes what Diamond Head Road is going to look like, what it's going to function like, and it's going to be tens of millions of dollars difference for the developers along that way. It seems like a few months, a month, 2 months of consultancy work, we can bring this document to public hearing in a much cleaner way with a lot less uncertainty. And I would prefer, we've spent a lot of time, staff have done a ton of work bringing this plan together. And I think with a little bit of extra work, we can bring it to the public, to public hearing in a much clearer way without this, if this, then that. So I'd be more than happy to support first reading, but not second reading.
Thank you. Councillor French.
Thank you, Mayor Herford. I support second reading of this neighborhood plan and moving this forward to a public hearing after, as noted by Councillor Stoner, years of work. And thank you, Councillor Anderson, for bringing up demolition and deconstruction. I think that's an important point. And I agree, this neighborhood could potentially be a great demonstration project to show how demolition and deconstruction can be done in sustainable and environmentally conscious way. I noted earlier during the questions that I was having troubles formulating a question. Here's that statement. Enclosed parking spaces in townhouse developments may include garage entrances and sizes that are suitable for large vehicles frequently owned by Squamish residents. That's a quote from the plan. And I was happy to see that, although would like for the language to be a little stronger and be more like enclosed parking spaces in townhouse developments will include some garage entrances and sizes that are suitable for large vehicles frequently owned by Squamish residents. This would give us a situation where we could have townhouse development with, say, 80% garages that are perfect for a Toyota Corolla, and the other 20% could actually fit an F-350 or a Sprinter van. Hard questions have been asked and answered through this project. Difficult conversations have definitely been had. And I believe to this point, thorough work has been done, being mindful of the flood control question mark that does sit in front of us. I am comfortable with all of that, and I'm also comfortable with moving this plan forward. I look forward to the feedback in the public hearing.
Thank you. Councillor Greenlaw, then Penningill.
Thanks. Through the chair, I won't be supporting the motion on the floor. I get that this is a plan and not necessarily a forecast of what the neighborhood will look like anytime in the near future, but I still have misgivings about how this plan came into being and in my opinion, and the opinion of many residents, lack of incorporation of input from current residents. I have concerns around the infrastructural and amenity tolls that this level of densification will take on the neighborhood and the community. I'm also concerned about the amount of growth and the direction we're taking as a district with regards to densification. Building substantially more housing only really helps us if we're building a significant, and I mean in excess of 50% amount of affordable housing. We have seen no evidence that continuing to increase the supply will reduce housing costs. And if we can't address the affordability issue, we will continue to hemorrhage our community members, or worse, see them unhoused. We have done a lot of development over recent years, and to my understanding, look to be well exceeding the housing needs predictions we received last year, not the ones from last week, which we all discussed already, which is about 6,800 houses by 2031. So I question the need for this level of densification in anything less than a 20-year timeline. And if that's the timeline that we're really looking at, then I think there should be some temporal aspect to the plan. As we discussed last week about growth, Mr. Gunn, unless I misunderstood, you alluded to that it's not just the need for the number of housings that's being built, like the number of units being built, but it's also the type of housing. And I think implying that we need to satisfy that spectrum of housing types. And to me, the types of houses that are in this neighborhood, specifically houses that have adjacent and incorporated arable land that allows for a level of food security and climate change that cannot be replaced. Not to mention the animal habitat and potential corridor value that these lands hold. Though community members ultimately have the choice of keeping their lots and thereby reducing the densification, they still run the risk of compromising the arability, no idea if I just made up that word, of the land through shadows from surrounding buildings. So for me, this plan doesn't have enough protection of that housing style that could still accommodate gentle densification and maintain the defining characteristics of the community while protecting arable land. And I'm very curious about this response from SD48 indicating that capacity will not be an issue. Just pulling up an article from the chief in 2020 claiming that Brackendale Elementary was at 81% capacity, Garibaldi Heights Elementary was at 113, Mamquam at 105, Squamish Elementary at 101, Valley Cliff at 99%, and Don Ross and Housetown Secondary at 81% capacity. And that was, 22% ago, population-wise. Our population's grown 22% since then. So that information to me is surprising, especially given, as Councillor Stoner pointed out, our childcare shortage. But also, and this just could be who I'm hanging out with, there are a lot of young children and pregnant ladies in this town. So that conclusion from SD48 surprises me, and I wouldn't mind seeing that data. I do like some aspects of this plan. I like the idea that it may someday maximize the potential of a transit hub, though that use is pending the compliance of a feet-dragging province. It could support an active, livable, car-free community for families and ground-oriented residences that could improve accessibility. Though I will point out that sometimes people with accessibility needs actually require vehicles, which is not necessarily fully accommodated for in this plan. And if it were a community plan for an area that didn't already have a established community there, I would be more supportive. I also want to echo some of the concerns that Councillor Hamilton shared about ensuring connectivity of bike lanes and sidewalks. Just, keeping that in mind of how we're actually going to address that and make that usable in the long run. Sidewalks are great, but they're also super expensive, and just having them in front of one building isn't going to do us any good. And I'll also echo some of the comments from Councillor Anderson about demolition waste. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I'm going to test an amendment to amend this to first reading, and I'll speak to it if seconded.
Is that seconded? Seconded, Councillor Hamilton. Just make sure we're on side with our. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, and just my rationale here is my understanding is if we defeated it and then try to put one on for first reading, that would be offside. So I think if we're going to go to one, we have to do that here. And I thought, better to have a debate about first or second and then decide where we are there if we're going to support it. I do have a couple of other pieces of feedback that I would like to give, which I don't think is feasible if we give it second reading, which is partly my interest for just first reading. Overall, though, I do find this generally supportive, so just wanted to test on the first reading piece first.
Thank you. I just want to check with our corporate officer. If we're providing first reading, we generally want to lay out some very clear objectives in that. And this resolution, I think, maybe only gets us a portion of the way there. So how do you think we should address that? Do we need to go into that feedback as part of this amendment or elsewhere in this process?
At first reading, it's less critical that the feedback is very specific. The more specific that council can make it, the more success staff will have walking away. So if you did have specific feedback to incorporate, now would be the time when we're testing the amendment. Yeah, so it'll be put the amendment on the floor and then vote on the amendment and then vote on the main motion as amended.
Okay. Anything else on for your comments, Councillor? I'll go to your seconder. Otherwise,
no. I think if it came, I think I'm not sure where there's support on the rest of my feedback. So I think if there's support anywhere, it's on the first reading piece. And so if that passes, then I will get into my feedback maybe with the second amendment, depending on my sense of the room.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, I support the amended motion. For me, the grounds are pretty clear, and I think I stated that initially in my lack of support for the second reading. And my feedback for the first reading is really quite simple, that I would just require to have the overland flood hazard question resolved before moving to second reading.
Thank you. Other comments on this amendment? I'm torn on this one. I was supportive of I'm supportive of two readings, but I do think that having as broad as possible council support for an initiative of this size is important. With that in mind, I'll support the amendment on those with the rationale that I've heard from Councillor Hamilton, and we heard that there could be other reasons, other pieces coming from others, but on that piece, I accept that the need for that piece of information from individual council, and I do think that the broader the support for this for any of our initiatives, the better, and particularly this one. We're quite a ways into this, as others have mentioned, and I think it's important that we recognize the needs around the table, especially when they're so very clearly articulated and relatively close at hand. So for that reason, I'll be supporting the amendment. So on the yes.
Just a point of clarification. So right now the motion on the floor is just for first reading without any feedback. Okay, just wanted to confirm.
And although I was just picking up on the rationale provided for the one reading, but yes, that's the motion itself is for one reading. Any other comments on the amendment? I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed, if any? Councillor French and Anderson oppose. And Councillor Stoner just blinked off camera right when that vote was happening. So I would look to clarify if she can still. Councillor Stoner, are you still here? And can you register your vote on that last?
And I'll support the amendment.
Support the amendment. Thank you. So Councillor Anderson, French opposed. Motion carries. So now we're on to the motion as amended. And I guess further amendments would be required to formalize our feedback as a council. And I would say that may not be necessary on the one particular piece that was clear, but I would look to my colleagues to see any further comments on first reading. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner, or sorry, Pettingill.
Thank you. I support my colleague's suggestion that we get some clarity on the FCL piece. For me, I would also appreciate just some clarity on alignment with the transportation master plan in terms of bike lanes, but lane assumptions and so on, where we're using the mode shift level. I think it would be better if all those things are aligned. And again, I'm not quite sure they are. So getting that clarity would be great and integrate if necessary. The only other thing, and I'm not feeling compelled to put forward a further amendment at this point. I'll just make the comment, would love it to be a bit more explicit about aligning the employment with the housing type in terms of these sorts of jobs in general will support this sort of housing. Just always appreciate that kind of language. And I still am a bit uncomfortable with some of the specificity, and I don't have a solution to propose, which is why I'm not proposing an amendment, but just I do worry we're tying our hands a little bit too much in terms of our CAC policy and bylaws and so on. Would feel a little more comfortable with just a bit more, slightly more subjective direction of like more higher FARs and so on, but the hard numbers scare me a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Council, I do think that as much as it was, I maybe just contradicting myself, I think that putting I'm going to propose an amendment that we include the language around the FCL study. Sorry, I just go to staff. Is it what's the correct name of that? So I know that we're not, it's the Master Creek Overland Flood Hazard Study. Is that what it is? That study. I think we all know the study we're talking about, but I'd like the motion to reflect the official name, just to be clear.
Master Creek Hazard Assessment.
Master Creek Hazard Assessment. So that the Master Creek Hazard Assessment results are seconder for that motion. Hamilton, I think this one's self-explanatory, but I wanted to be explicit with our requirement. I'm hearing that echo as well. Any comments on this amendment? Oh, weird. Are we good? We're good. Okay, so are there any Councillor Hamilton had seconded this. I don't think I need any, this is fairly self-explanatory. So I'm going to call the question. Seeing no hands, I'm going to call a question on this amendment. All in favor? And opposed, if any? Motion carries. So now we're on to back to the amended motion, twice amended motion. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I will support this and want to thank everyone, the community, staff. This has been a long process, and I'm glad to see this moving into the next phases. I'm glad to make sure we're dotting the I's and crossing the T's. But I think there's been different perspectives on whether or not this reflects community's wishes. I think the challenge is there are different needs, different wants, and a lot of things we have to accommodate. And I think we actually have listened and tried to accommodate as much as we can. It's just a challenge when people have different perspectives. I think anecdotal, but one thing that stuck out at me is during the seniors budget engagement, I spoke to a gentleman who's a long time Squamish resident. And he started off the conversation by saying, you know, he's frustrated with us that he doesn't see council listening to he and his wife, their needs, and got to talking about a few things. But one of the things that evolved was they're living in Hospital Hill and they're getting to an age where they can't live in their multi-level home anymore. And they really want to stay in Squamish, but they're not seeing ground-oriented, smaller places that are within their means being built. And I sort of spoke to him about what we we're trying to do in Garibaldi Estates and some of the challenges we were having in the public dialogue. And it was a quick, quite a turnaround in his perspective. And he actually then felt really listened to by council, and was very appreciative that we are thinking about seniors and where they're going to live, how they can stay in community. And again, everyone has a different story and different perspective, but I think it's important to for everyone to understand that we are trying to listen to all these different stories and find a place for all of them. And so I do see a lot of that work reflected here, and appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be supporting the motion. I think being involved in this process, when I reflect back to where we started, and you know, in a pre Bill 44 world, and just how much has changed. I think it's been an interesting place to have those, to sort of be on the forefront of the conversation as we experience change sort of put upon us by the province broadly, as well as change that we're initiating and planning for the future. In some earlier discussions on this topic, I made some comments about taking into consideration the people that aren't living in this neighborhood as we make plans for our community. And that holds broadly across the community. And what I mean by that, and I want to clarify this, is that is also our children and grandchildren that aren't here yet. It's also the doctor I don't have. And it's also the future public safety people that we need to have in our community to meet our community's needs. So these are, and if we're not taking into consideration the needs of the community, which do include folks that aren't here yet, but we really wish they were here to provide some of these services that we really need to function as a community, then we're not doing our job. So I think it's really important that we take take that lens to all the work that we do, and particularly this process. So I'm happy to, that was a great story that Councillor Pettingill shared. And my grandparents essentially lived that story on Ridgeway and stayed in their in their multi-level single family home. And I know that the reason that they were there is they loved the neighborhood, and they would have really liked to be able to stay in a garden suite, a smaller place, an apartment, anything, and still be in the neighborhood. And their only choice they had that was available to them in the neighborhood was to remain in their home, they were overhoused. And so I think it's really important that we take all these things into consideration, the experience of the people that have lived in that neighborhood and have since passed in their case, and the folks that aren't here yet, as well as the important lived experience of the folks that are living in the neighborhood at this point. And I think they all deserve voices in the conversation. And frankly, I see them all reflected, all those perspectives, and more reflected in the policy that we've arrived at here. So I do look forward to seeing the next piece of this come forward. And I know we're going to be looking at this, revisiting this again in short order, and I expect that conversation to be much shorter than it was today. So thank you very much to staff for all their work, continued work on this, and we'll see you back shortly in the new year. That I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed? Councillor Greenlaw opposes. Motion carries. Thank you very much. So Council, we took a couple breaks and we're a little behind, but I still think we should take a quick 5-minute break just to stretch, and we'll let staff reset for get ready for the next topic. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. We'll be back at 8:10. We're on item 9, B1. So this is the RM density bonus. I'll turn over to staff to introduce themselves and run us through the topic.
Thank you, Mayor Herford. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Brian Daly, planner with Community Planning. With me is Jesse Fletcher, manager of current planning, as well as Jeff Waters, who is the consultant who is working with us on this project. Tonight, I'll be presenting a density bonus option for the RM2 and RM3 zones and some amendments related to student and faculty housing in the zoning bylaw. At the February 27th.
Recuse myself?
Yep. Go ahead.
I don't think so. I'd like to recuse myself from this conversation because the university housing is combined in this item. And as an employee of Capilano University, I think I should recuse myself from the conversation.
Great. Thank you for that. And yeah, we will come and we will alert you when yeah, you can just turn your camera off there. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Thank you. And we will come and find you when we're through with this topic. Thank you.
All right. At the February 27th, 2024 regular council meeting, staff presented a fulsome background on the Squamish Housing Action Plan. The RM density bonus zoning bylaw update fulfills some of the goals in the density bonus program and community amenity contribution policy adjustments commitment in the Housing Action Plan, including instituting a density bonus for affordable and market rental housing and for student housing near post-secondary institutions, and pilot and implement a 2-tier density bonus program for market rental and affordable rental zoning. The district has retained a consultant to prepare a financial feasibility analysis to inform a density bonus program for both the RM2 and RM3 zones. So the RM2 and RM3 zones were selected to pilot a density bonus program, given that their relatively high base density requires less bonus density to make the projects financially viable. This results in a slightly more dense project that delivers a wider range of housing tenures. Both zones are also found in most areas of the community, typically in close proximity to existing services. Section 482.2 of the Local Government Act requires that a financial feasibility analysis be undertaken prior to adopting a density benefit zoning bylaw amendment. The goal of the density bonus program is to deliver privately held affordable rental housing or units that could be sold to a nonprofit housing provider for 20% below market rates. The financial analysis prepared by the consultant has indicated that providing affordable rental housing would be financially viable with a density bonus of 0.3 floor area ratio or FAR total, with 50% of the additional area being allocated to additional market rental or for sale market housing, and the remaining 50% being allocated to affordable rental housing or affordable rental housing sold to a nonprofit housing provider at 20% below market rate. It should be noted that floor area used for affordable rental housing is exempted from gross floor area calculations. This is reflected in how the bonuses are structured, as will be outlined later in this presentation. So the next few slides are going to show locations where the zoning is in place throughout the community. So this is the Valley Cliff neighborhood. As you can see, there's some RM2 and RM3 adjacent to the existing commercial node. There's also a very small pocket at the corner of Westway and Guilford. This is the Dentville and Wilson Crescent neighborhood. Wilson Crescent has the majority of the RM2 zoning. This is the North Yards neighborhood. This is the Mamquam neighborhood west of Highway 99 and north of the Mamquam River. And finally, this is the Garibaldi Estates neighborhood. It should be noted that there is some RM2 and RM3 zoning north of here in the district, but those fall into conditional densification areas. So the density bonus is not applicable to those areas. The RM2 density bonus includes an increase in the maximum floor area ratio from 0.8 to 0.95. It includes a minimum rear setback reduction to 4.57 meters, and the maximum height may be increased by 1 meter, provided that one of the following conditions are met. All of the residential units permitted up to the maximum bonus density of 0.95 are secured as market rental housing, and a minimum of 0.15 additional floor area ratio is provided and secured as affordable rental housing in perpetuity through a housing agreement. Or the other option, a minimum of an additional 0.15 floor area ratio is provided and secured as affordable rental housing in perpetuity through a housing agreement and sold to a not-for-profit housing provider at 20% below market rate. The 1 meter increase in height is appropriate for a townhome form of development and similar to the 11 meter maximum height permitted for multiple dwelling residential use in the R1 zone. The rear setback reduction is a common variance request from developers in the RM2 zone and would facilitate adding additional units on site. The RM3 density bonus is structured the same as the RM2 bonus and includes an increase in the maximum floor area ratio from 1.0 to 1.15 and an increase in the maximum height from 15 meters to 18 meters or 5 stories, whichever is less, provided one of the following conditions are met. The first being all of the residential units up to the maximum bonus density of 1.15 are secured as market rental housing, and a minimum of an additional 0.15 floor area ratio is provided and secured as affordable rental housing in perpetuity through a housing agreement, or a minimum 0.5 additional FAR is provided and secured through a housing agreement to be sold to a not-for-profit housing provider at 20% below market rate. Staff did not include setback relaxations in the RM3 zone, given that the height bonus allows for a 5-story building. Should an applicant wish to relax any of the required setbacks in RM3, they could apply for a development variance permit. Another of the Housing Accelerator Fund commitments involves exploring opportunities to facilitate the delivery of student and faculty housing. Staff are proposing to amend the definition of student and faculty housing to remove the restriction on single unit dwellings being used for such use, and to add language requiring that a housing agreement be in place to ensure that the units are occupied by students attending or faculty working at the university. The amendment also proposes to remove the 1,500 dwelling unit cap on student and faculty housing from the UC1 zone. There are currently 408 student residence units constructed in the UC1 zone. Staff recommend amending the definition of student and faculty housing and removing the unit cap to allow for greater flexibility for the delivery of this form of housing should the university require additional housing for this use. This amendment supports the district's commitments to CMHC secured in the Housing Accelerator Fund grant agreement. So for the project engagement for this, Section 42.1 of the Local Government Act requires consultation with persons and organizations the local government considers appropriate during the development of a density benefit zoning bylaw. Staff engaged with the Urban Development Institute, or UDI, and incorporated feedback received on the bonus model, which informed the proposed bonus options in the bylaw. Staff also referred the RM density bonus proposal to Squamish Housing Society, who were overall supportive of the proposal, but noted it would likely be challenging for a cash poor not-for-profit to take advantage of the below market for sale bonus option. Information regarding the student and faculty housing zoning changes was sent to Capilano University, and they were generally supportive. So the staff recommendation is that bylaw number 3107 be given first, second, and third reading. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I'll start. I just think the map that showed the properties in that this would affect, the Garibaldi piece, I would just like to understand how what we're talking about here interplays with the topic that we just discussed, which was the neighborhood plan for the area. And when the neighborhood plan's adopted, does this supersede this, or how do these things mesh at this point?
So through you, Mayor, the plan is providing a general guide for future development in the area. At this point, the zoning isn't meant to change. Most of the properties in the estates with the zoning have been recently developed and are unlikely to redevelop in the near term, with the exception potentially of the ones closer to Tantalus Road. So an applicant could take advantage of this density bonus under the existing zoning, or if the plan contemplated a higher density that's appropriate, they could go through a rezoning process to redevelop under the vision of the plan. I'll pass it to my manager.
Thank you. Through the mayor, just to add to that, the properties within the plan are slated for a higher FAR than what's contemplated here with this amendment. We did work with the planner on the Garibaldi Estates plan, it doesn't foresee this having any issue with that. Likely through the zoning that would happen if the plan were to be endorsed by council, we would then subsequently zone it to a higher level for some of these properties in alignment with the strategy there.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to thank you for that clarity. Council, questions on this? Yeah, Councillor Pettingill.
In general, I like the idea of a not-for-profit getting some ownership at 20% below market, but just, you know, we get a zoning application, it fits under this, so we approve it. Then it comes time to actually purchase the unit, and the not-for-profit just can't. And so there's this unit, there's this commitment, but the new building's built. What is our sort of mechanism to deal with that?
Through the mayor, that would be through the housing agreement that they would have to enter into at the time of development permit. So that would have to outline that ultimate scenario. And realistically, if a developer is going through this process, they're going to want some fairly concrete commitments that they will be able to purchase these units because this will live on title. So they will have to sell it to a not-for-profit at 20% below market rate. So if that, for whatever reason, fell through, then they would have to find another not-for-profit to come and purchase that. So that would live on title, and they wouldn't just be able to sell it to anyone. It would still have to go to a not-for-profit at below market rate. So it would be obviously in the developer's best interest to make sure that they have an agreement or a memorandum of understanding with the housing provider to ensure that that bonus runs smoothly in the future for them.
And is that housing agreement that would encapsulate that? Would this be a new sort of require a new template to go with this work? Is that sort of like one of the next pieces of this?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, thanks. That's good. Yeah, I just want to be careful that, and I don't know why they would, but that we wouldn't want to end up in a situation where we have units just sitting there because we can't find the not-for-profit, but they're selling the rest. So just as long as we're comfortable, we can deal with that. The other piece, and I'm trying to find the loopholes, but I wonder with this bylaws proposed, what stops me or the university for offering a 15-minute course and then you get a year in the suites, or you work for 15 minutes in the cafeteria and then you qualify? Like, can we or should we put some parameters on what employment or attending the school means?
Through the mayor, staff believe that just restricting the use generally to student attending the university or staff working at the university is appropriate, and to let Capilano or whatever university is operating there manage how they tenant those buildings. It's just the housing agreement's meant to be overarching to ensure that generally it is used for those purposes, but obviously practically that would be extremely hard to, for the district to go in and manage and check in on. It would be up for the university to manage that.
So is there no mechanism or standard sort of definition of student that would sort of preclude the thing I'm concerned about? Because I can think of a cash-strapped school might want to find loopholes or whatever, and it's maybe not what our vision is.
Through the mayor, staff have a good working relationship with the university, and I don't foresee that being an issue. And I mean, the reality is there probably are folks who would look for loopholes in any scenario, and staff feel comfortable that leaving it to the university to manage how they tenant their buildings in the spirit of the housing agreement would be effective. We rely on a complaints basis. So if there was a scenario where they were renting it out in contravention of the housing agreement and a complaint was made, then the district would have to take action to enforce that housing agreement.
But just to put a fine point on that, so if we got a complaint and the school said, oh, no, they are students, they took a 15-minute course, we'd have to say, oh, okay, I guess, or we could say, no, that's not on.
It could be defined within the housing agreement, but staff wouldn't recommend putting that level of detail into the housing agreement at this time.
Okay, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. I'll begin by picking up where Councillor Pettingill is on the the student and faculty housing. I'm just curious if staff can speak to the original rationale for the restriction on using single unit dwellings for student and faculty housing. So why was that in there originally?
Through the mayor, I do not know the answer to that question. That predates my time here. It was originally included in the zoning bylaw when the university sub-area plan was completed and those original zones were implemented into the bylaw. I am not sure why they included it at that time. Perhaps it was to ensure that, I mean, I'm just speculating, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me. I don't know the answer to that question.
That's fair. I guess I'm curious. So would this mean that like the single family or the single unit dwellings up in the university would then be eligible for student housing? So I think one of the rationales here is to try and incentivize the building more housing for students and faculty, not allowing existing housing to be taken over by student and faculty.
Through the mayor, student housing is a permitted use only in area 3 of the UH1 zone, which is that part that used to be part of the campus lands. It's now separate. So that wouldn't be a scenario that would happen. This is more about allowing flexibility for, not kind of restricting the form of housing that it takes should they wish to develop more student and faculty housing in the areas that have the zoning for it.
Okay, that's helpful clarity. Thank you. My other question is on the financial modeling for the density bonus. So one of the main things that jumped out at me on the pro formas is that the level of affordability that's being delivered in the pro formas is not currently in line with our existing perpetual housing agreements. They're off by a few $100s, if not a bit more. And so I'm just curious if staff can speak to ensuring that the level of affordability that we're expecting through this density bonusing is actually in line with our perpetual affordable housing policy.
I will pass that over to Jeff, who is the consultant.
Yes, through the chair, thank you for the question. So we based the affordability off of the 2021 census data that was used in the most recent housing template that was provided to us in this engagement. And then where we found that affordable rental rate to be significantly decoupled from today's market rates, we applied a slight escalation or inflation factor as at the time of adoption or when these projects would anticipate coming to market would be that 2021 data would be beyond 5 years old.
But I suspect that in 5 years' time, the cost of construction would also inflate. And so I'm just like, if we haven't accounted for the cost of construction inflating over 5 years, then why are we accounting for the rental cost increasing?
Through the chair, yeah, that is a fair comment. I think they're within these pro forma models, they're really meant to be a storytelling tool, and based off of the numbers that are presented or estimated at this current slice in time, there will be projects that will perform significantly better. There will be projects that perform significantly worse. Everything is a best estimate at this point in time. So there could be a slight escalation from, or one interpretation of the model could be that the construction number is already inflated for the future years, as well as just depending on the individual developer behind it.
Appreciate that rationale and the reminder that models are aimed to kind of capture hopefully the middle, but there will always be exceptions. Based on the modeling in front of us, do we have a sense of how feasible this might actually be for projects to move forward? Like, obviously we can see a path through, like there's a way to make it work potentially. Is that like a high likelihood or like it's still a bit of a stretch? And I realize that's a bit of a hypothetical.
So through the mayor, the numbers generally, as Jeff mentioned, they're telling a story that it is likely feasible. Obviously, there are complicating factors depending on whereabouts you're located in town. If the infrastructure existing there is not sufficient and requires significant upgrades, or there's, significant frontage improvements required based on the existing condition. That could make it challenging to take advantage of. But what this model is saying is this is likely financially viable based on the assumptions that were provided in the pro forma. So staff are recommending to implement it as a pilot project to see what uptake there is, if any, and then revisit it. Obviously, if a year or two go by and no projects have taken advantage of this density bonus, then it's probably worth revisiting. But the story says it is likely viable, so staff are recommending proceeding with this as a pilot project in these two zones.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then one last question. In terms of the options, so either providing the 0.15 FAR as affordable rental versus 20% below sale price to a nonprofit, does that have to be determined? Like, when does that actually get determined, or can they like swap? So to Councillor Pettingill's point, like if they can't find a nonprofit to purchase, can they choose to make that simply affordable rental?
Through the mayor, that clause would need to be kind of ironed out in the housing agreement. The feature, like, we will have to develop a new housing agreement for that option, and that will have to be contemplated in that. The likely scenario is that staff would potentially need to do an amendment to the housing agreement if there was some scenario like this where that happened, and there would be a negotiation if, for whatever reason, they couldn't find anyone to purchase it, then staff could negotiate that. And likely you would know pretty, if they're building the building and they still don't have a buyer, we'd be talking to the developer because they would likely be concerned at that point.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Sorry, I'm still hung up on this definition of a student or working at the university. And so again, if we got a complaint, someone said, oh, they're not real students. The university said, oh, well, they took a 15-minute course. Do we believe that with this bylaw, we would be able to say that's offside, or we would have to say, sorry, there's nothing we can do there?
Through the mayor. So to answer your question, the appropriate place for that level of detail that you're concerned about would be in the housing agreement that we would be running to secure those units. So if they wanted to fall under this student and faculty housing use, it says in the definition that it needs to be secured through a housing agreement. There's already housing agreements in place on a couple of those student residence buildings. It doesn't go to that level of detail. But if council wished at that point, if that application came forward, if the council was uncomfortable with that, not being really nailed down in detail, that would be the appropriate time to have that definition, and it wouldn't live in the zoning bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? We do have a recommendation before us here. If someone's ready to move that, which I will do if there's a seconder. Seconded by Councillor French. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for bringing this forward. I think it's really an interesting piece. I know that the properties this affect are largely relatively recently developed, sort of broadly. So I'm curious to see the impact that this will actually have as we go forward. And I appreciate the sort of pilot project nature of this. So I think this is a totally reasonable starting point, and I hope it has the desired effect. And I look forward to grappling with some of the issues that have come up here today in the housing agreements that will be associated with these. Should these start to advance or move forward through our process. So thank you for the work on this, and I'll be happy to support. I've got Councillor Stoner next.
Can you folks hear me okay?
We can.
Great. I'm just going to keep my video off because my internet's a bit spotty. I'll just say that I'll be supporting the motion on the floor. I think that this is one additional tool in our toolbox to try and ensure that new development has options for bringing forward a component of affordability to them. We know that it does take a diversity of tenure types for everybody in our community to be able to call us home. And this might not be a perfect tool, but I think it's definitely worth trialing and seeing if there's some uptake on it, especially since with the changes in provincial legislation, we have lesser options in terms of trying to secure affordable housing through CACs and ACCs, and this might be a better option going forward to allow density bonus. So I'm curious to see the uptake in this in the development community and the feasibility of it in projects that actually get penciled out. But I think it's a good step in the right direction. So happy to support the work that's been done here. Thanks to staff and our consultants.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. I will support this, and I do appreciate the attempts to find more tools and incentives to find affordability. And I just want to comment on the rationale for some of my anxiety around, some of the definitions around student and working at the university. I think we have seen with some of the residents challenges in how they're being used and maybe not always aligned with what the vision has been with a couple projects that are currently happening in particular, which may not be at issue, those particular projects, by the time we start seeing housing under this come forward. But it does highlight when housing is so critical and we have to be so thoughtful about how it gets used and that it's serving the people that really need it. I do think it is important that we're pretty clear on what our expectations are and we're holding enough control there for the benefit of the community. So, I think it sounds like we'll have to really pay attention to the housing agreements when they come forward. And so I'll look forward to that. And in the meantime, happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. So council, next we have some adoptions. First we have the District of Squamish. Oh, thank you. Well, Councillor Hamilton's rejoining us. So first we have the District of Squamish 2025 to 2029 5-year financial plan bylaw, number 3137/2024, which I would like to move adoption, second by Councillor French. I think I'm going to go through, I think I made all the comments I needed to last week, so I'm happy to move adoption. If anyone else would like to make comments, you're welcome to. Councillor Stoner.
Woohoo! Thanks, staff. Thanks, team. Thanks, community. We did it.
I think we'd all like to second that that comment by Councillor Stoner. Thank you for that. I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Next piece is the District of Squamish Council Procedure Bylaw, which I'll also move, and seconded by Councillor French. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. And now we're on to staff reports. So now this is we're on to development permit number 627 for 38123 Cleveland Avenue. And we've got Mr. Daly here with us to run us through.
Thank you, Mayor Herford. Hello again. My name is Brian Daly, planner with Community Planning, and I will now be presenting a development permit application at 38123 Cleveland Avenue. At the September 3rd, 2024 regular council meeting, bylaw number 2757/2023 was adopted. This rezoned the subject property from downtown commercial C4 to comprehensive development zone number 111 to facilitate the development of a 6-story mixed-use building. The subject property is located in downtown Squamish at the northwest corner of Cleveland Avenue and Winnipeg Street. The site is currently developed with a single-story commercial building and a surface parking lot. This DP application seeks to establish the form and character of a 6-story mixed-use building. The proposed development has a floor area ratio of 2.24 and possesses 4,909 square meters of gross floor area. The proposed development consists of ground floor retail, 5 stories of office, and residential use. The residential component consists of 44 residential units. 6 of which will be secured as affordable rental in alignment with the District of Squamish perpetual affordable housing policy. The proposal meets the CD 111 zone and is compliant with the district's draft downtown viewscape study. Building height is 22.8 meters and proposed parking meets the requirements of the CD 111 zone. 23 stalls for non-residential use are required. 13 will be provided and cash in lieu for the remaining 10 in the amount of $300,000 will be provided in accordance with the zoning bylaw and the cash in lieu of parking bylaw. Common outdoor amenity space is provided on the 3rd floor, adjacent to the shared indoor amenity space for the building. The building's overall massing is shaped by views and setbacks guided by the draft downtown viewscape study. The massing is divided into smaller volumes, highlighting different identities and creating a stepped facade with terraces that offer views of the surrounding mountains from various levels. The terrace on level 3 provides a large amenity space for both residents and office tenants. The setback provided by the terrace also helps to maintain the first-story topology consistent with what currently exists along this section of Cleveland Avenue. The overall landscape design integrates natural elements, inviting gathering spaces, and subtle lighting to create an environment that is not only functional and visually appealing, but also sustainable. At the heart of the project, the plaza serves as a central gathering space, providing seating through the use of heavy timber benches and tables. These elements introduce warmth and a natural feel to the environment, fostering a sense of comfort and community. The seating areas are thoughtfully integrated within the rock landscape and berm, featured by pine and maple trees that offer seasonal interest. This development permit was presented at the June 20th, 2024 ADP meeting. ADP reviewed the project and provided the recommendations shown on this slide. Staff believe the applicant's response to the comments are sufficient and consistent with the DPA 3 guidelines. To inform the community per policy, the project was posted to the district's development showcase and a development sign has been posted at the site. No comments or requests for public information meeting have been received to date. So given that the proposal meets the DPA 3 guidelines generally, staff recommend approval of DP 627 subject to the conditions noted on the screen. Staff are also recommending that the cash in lieu amount required for this application be directed to the Alternative Forms of Transportation Reserve Fund. And the following item on this agenda is the housing agreement to secure 6 units as affordable rental housing. And the recommendation is that bylaw be given first 3 readings. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Council, questions on what we've seen there? And then I will have a question about, sorry, as you presented the recommendation 4, I have as a separate agenda item. So I just want to make sure we stay on side there, but we'll get there. Council, questions on what we've heard or what was in the report? Councilor Pettingill?
Yeah, can you clarify what we're responsible for and what the proponents are responsible for in terms of the plaza, sort of ongoing maintenance and so on?
So through the mayor, the developer will be responsible for construction of the plaza, and then the future strata will be responsible for maintenance. So there's the frontage and sidewalk maintenance bylaw that's in place in the district, and that requires folks to maintain their frontage. I know that just given that it's on Cleveland Avenue, sometimes our park staff do maintenance on the trees and some of the landscape plantings, but it is the strata's responsibility for maintenance, such as snow clearing and things like that.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just wondering if you can remind me about where we landed on expectations for plazas on this corner. My recollection is that we had a fair bit of discussion with some of the other proposals on these corners about the plazas, how they fit together, and this being a sort of a feature core area. I vaguely recall we had some discussion too about challenges trying to fit in the parking and affordable units and so on, because I think initially there's some thought the plaza seemed a bit underwhelming maybe, and I still feel like there's not a lot there. So I'm just wondering if you can give me a bit of a refresher on where we sort of landed on expectations of plaza and what is reasonable to expect there.
So through the mayor, the design of the plaza and the delivery of that was secured through the land development agreement at the rezoning stage. That will be captured through the servicing agreement process that the developer will have to go through should this development permit be approved. So that design is the general high-level design was secured at the land development agreement, and they are required to build the plaza space to at least that standard, and whatever ultimately is finalized through the servicing agreement process with the engineering department.
Okay, and then looking at the architectural diagrams, it was a little bit hard to see, but it didn't look like if I walked along the facade of the building, I would have continuous protection from rain and so on. And I had thought that that was a goal of Cleveland and second in my mind, that really you would have continuous coverage. And the what's it called? DPA guidelines. There is a guideline that, to my mind, speaks to that. I'm just wondering, am I misinterpreting the diagrams, or can you speak to what is happening there?
Through the mayor, there is not fully continuous. There's overhangs at each building entry and on some of the sort of little patio spaces out front of them. So that provides coverage over that. The building is built to 0 lot lines, so they would require an encroachment agreement to build any kind of awnings over onto the district road right of way. And that gets reviewed at the building permit stage. And generally, I don't believe we do completely continuous coverage anymore, because it could impact with if the district needs to get in and do works within the road right of way. But there is continuous weather protection at each entryway. So each of the entrances to the commercial units, the residential units where you're exiting or entering the building. And there's also sufficient coverage for little patio spaces outside of those, as all the entrances are recessed.
So, but don't we have other buildings where, there's a couple meters of overhang or some sort, like on Second in particular? Like, is that an unreasonable expectation?
Through the mayor, there are buildings that do enter into encroachment agreements and that do encroach within district right of ways for continuous weather protection. In this specific case, the applicant has chosen not to go continuous weather protection for a variety of reasons. The consideration here is that guideline says to support continuous weather protection. They meet somewhat there. They mostly meet the guideline and the content of the DP guidelines that they need to meet to achieve the permit.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm quite sold on that one, but
just if I could add, it would affect the form and character of the building if you do have like a continuous overhang. And they are putting quite a bit of consideration into that kind of second story, and to try and maintain the look of the building to sort of appear as a 2-story building when you're along Cleveland. So that would impact it if you had a big overhang kind of breaking that up, and it would not allow you to see that kind of nice treatment they have on the second story.
Yeah, I think there's some glass overhangs on Second that you can see through, but I'll leave that one for now and chew on that. And just wanting the mid-block pass-through, it's 1.5 meters. My assumptions were thinking 1.5 meters on the adjoining lot, but I can't remember, and I just didn't have time to look. The adjoining lot, does it have room for a 1.5 meter on its side to give us 3 total, or where are we on that?
Through the mayor, as it's currently developed to 0 lot line, so presently no, but in a redevelopment scenario, there is an interior side setback of 1.5 meters in the C4 zone. If the lot shares a lot line developed for a residential assembly or a couple other uses, and because this has a residential component, that 1.5 meter setback would be applicable to the adjacent property in a redevelopment scenario if they develop under C4.
But I guess then that means, though, if my recollection of the buildings there are correct, we could be with a 1.5 meter pass through for quite a long time. Is that fair?
That is fair. The initial section that kind of, I don't have the dimensions off the top of my head, but the building is further recessed kind of for a portion of it. So it is like where the covered bike parking and things are. It's more than 1.5 meters there, but it's 1.5 meters to kind of the edge of the parkade wall when you get back towards the lane.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
I'd like to return to the topic Councillor Pettingill's raised of the plaza and its treatment. For the reason, of course, that this is a very prominent corner and we should really be looking for a wow factor here. And I just have a suggestion I wanted to test with you, Mr. Daly, to see if it's practical. In the comments, so right now, the proposal for the surface treatment of the plaza is a paving type 1 is a light in-cast place concrete with orthogonal control joints and granite flagstone inserts. And the other treatment is terrazzo flooring. It's a colored, you can vision it on the in the plans here, meandering blue color. But under public art, to quote from the report, staff recommend that the contribution, $30,000, be put into a public art fund until the district can meet maintenance requirements for public art. The public art policy requires a maintenance contribution which would exceed what the proponent has offered. My observation is that one category of public art, which might be relevant here at this plaza on this corner, is pebble or tile mosaic. And according to our district public art maintenance consultant, there is great success all around the Lower Mainland with this form of public art installation with respect to maintenance. There's virtually none. So my question is, can this be considered as a way of enhancing that plaza and realizing a public art installation? Is this something that might be discussed and could be considered?
Through the mayor, that comment can certainly be passed along to the engineering staff in the review of the servicing agreement. I don't know the specific details of the specific design that was secured at the land development agreement for the plaza, but I'm happy to pass that along.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Other questions, Council? Yep, go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
I raised some concerns about the width of the pass through. Do we have any mechanism at this point, now that we're at DP, to push for something more, or is it really we should have dealt with that at the rezoning?
Through the mayor, that would have been an item to deal with through the rezoning process.
Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thank you, the chair. I'm just wondering if staff can clarify what the commitment is in terms of adaptable units.
Through the mayor, the adaptable unit commitment would be the requirement of the BC Building Code. Unless I will pass it to my manager in case you recall. I don't believe there's anything in the land development agreement that's secured above what the BC Building Code requires. But I believe that is it 10%? It would just be whatever the requirement is in the building code, which I don't know off the top of my head.
Is it in line with our DPA policy of 10% units?
I believe it is.
Thank you.
And on that point, I wonder, just sort of in general with these guidelines, if that's what the BC building, does it need to live in a DP area guideline if the BC building code hits their objective? Like, it just feels like a duplication. Is that what this is? And maybe historically wasn't always the case. I felt that reply was intriguing because of that reason. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the mayor, we're in a bit of a flux time with the integration of the new BC building code. The updated DP guidelines that were approved by council earlier this year does remove this guideline and leaves it to the code. There's been future guidance about application of the code that sort of puts this project in a bit of a limbo with that. But yeah, moving forward, this will not live in the DP guidelines.
So there was some discussion earlier around this covered for the sidewalk, and it's captured in 36.5 subset D. Provide continuous functional overhead weather protection along the sides of buildings abutting public right-of-ways and entrances. And it says meet guidelines. It says, but weather protection is provided along the majority of the storefronts on Cleveland Avenue and Winnipeg Street. So majority is different than continuous. And I want to make sure that that we understand those. Are those meant to cover some tables on the sidewalk and then functionally won't be available to cover the folks walking down the street, which I think is the intent of this? I just can't quite pull that level of detail out here to understand if if that does in fact meet the intention of the guideline. I get that 100% might not be achievable or desirable, but is what's there actually functioning, covering some of the sidewalk?
Yes, through you, Mayor. I believe it is meeting the intention of the guideline, and this streetscape along Cleveland is providing quite a large pedestrian realm, so it would be practically or very challenging to cover the whole sidewalk for pedestrians. But staff's review of the permit or the DP guideline or the DP drawings and DP guidelines felt that it was meeting the intent of the guideline. That's why it was noted as such in the staff report.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. Council, we have a recommendation before us, and just to go back earlier, so as presented in our agenda package, we need to do the housing agreement separate. So it'd be the first 3 points that were on the slide, or as it appears in your agenda package. Is another way to do that. Someone prepared to move that? Councillor French moves. Thank you. Councillor Hamilton seconds. Comments? No comments. Okay. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased that staff has will take on the suggestion of communicating with the project participants about the possibility of enhancing the plaza through public art. My other comment concerns cladding, and it's a very general one, and it's a theme that you've heard from Councillor Anderson before. We have a building that is titled Cedar Peak, yet we don't have cedar, we have wood-colored cladding. It's not a wood material. The same architect is responsible for another spectacular building which does indeed have yellow cedar cladding at the oceanfront, namely the Presentation Center. In Stockholm, I visited 4 large skyscrapers clad in British Columbia Western red cedar 2 years ago, and it's widely acclaimed buildings all around the world. Spectacular. BC Western red cedar, probably from Squamish. But we are shipping our red cedar to Stockholm, and we are using wood-colored cladding. My main point is, I think that we should not, to quote the language from the architect, identity tied to natural surroundings, inspired by the natural surroundings, in choice of cladding themes and materials. I don't think we should be expecting this. And I certainly don't think that we should be prescribing it in policy. I would wish that the architect would feel free to explore, invent, and innovate and wow us with cladding that takes us to a new level here in Squamish. I know this architect has done so in other projects, and I would certainly hope that they would not be feeling constrained here. We need to do something new. We don't need to mimic natural surroundings, and we don't need to mimic what is here already. We need to take it to a new level. That's my personal opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner, did I see your hand? It's a legacy hand, maybe. Yeah. Thank you, staff, for the work on this, and I'm happy to support this. It does. I appreciate the rationale for sort of the questions that posed by myself and council, that this does meet the DP guidelines as intended. So happy to support. I was trying to have last word, but go ahead, Councillor Pettingill. If
Sorry, I'm just slow. I am not going to support this. I suspect or believe it's going to get supported. So I suppose I'm mostly making a point. I do feel that we've had discussions on the cover for the sidewalks, and given our efforts to get people out of vehicles, finding active modes, I know we can't cover the whole street necessarily, but I think it is something that we really need to highlight as important. And I just, for me, I think some of the buildings on Second in particular have done a good job of it, some of the new ones. And so I think there are options that are visible, you can see through and let light through and so on. And so I'm hoping through this action to just really encourage, if not at this development, but most all other ones, to really think about this small but really important aspect of the design. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Greenlaw.
Yeah, I won't be supporting the motion for reasons that I've stated previously about development, but I just want to say I'm not supportive of the cash in lieu for the 10 parking stalls. This building will increase traffic in the area and remove a lot of the existing stalls. So, you know, again, a cat herding exercise around the table. But I also wanted to echo some of the comments that Councillor Anderson's made about having more wow factor in this building, as it will be a centerpiece of our downtown, and also his general comments around aesthetics.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed, if any. Councillor Pettingill, Greenlaw, oppose. Motion carries. Thank you. Now we're on to first three readings of, or consideration of first three readings of the housing agreement for the same property, 38123 Cleveland Avenue. I'm assuming because this was captured in your previous recommendation, we have no further conversations on that. Do you have any, council, any questions before we consider the recommendation for three readings? Seeing none, I'm looking for, is there a mover for these three readings? Moved by Councillor Greenlaw, second by Councillor Hamilton. Comments on this portion? I'll go to the mover first if you want. No, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just think it's important to secure affordable housing, and we should be maximizing as much affordable housing as we can with any of this development that's coming through our town.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, I neglected to say in the last, I'll just take the opportunity here. Overall, I really do actually like what's been done with this development. Personally, like the aesthetics, I think we maybe should have pushed a bit more on the plaza piece, but I understand or recall there was some hard trade-offs there. And so also it is critical that we support getting affordable housing from development, which we are doing here. So happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? I'll be voting in support. As others have stated, affordable housing is incredibly important to a functioning community going forward, and this is our mechanism to secure that in this development. So I'm happy to support it. I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, council, we're on the home stretch here. We have no late agenda items. No correspondence action requested. I'm going to treat this correspondence referred from the consent agenda to include staff report. Feels like the place that lives. Councillor Anderson, you pulled that, the staff report. Would you like to speak to it?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Mayor Herford. I'm going to revisit something that came up in an earlier staff report on the same edition, or an earlier edition delivered May 21st of this year. And it had a line item that is missing from the current one. And I'd just like to put it out there that it is of interest, namely the North Crumpet pipeline alignment. And in the May 21st report, it stated alignment to follow Fortis BC right-of-way and the district to monitor. Well, the fact is that the stream crossing of the Squamish cannot or would not be using that right-of-way. A new alignment would need to be devised, and maybe it has, but we haven't been apprised of that. For environmental reasons, we wouldn't want to follow, and Fortis agrees, that right-of-way that they have from 30 years ago. The other issue is that the pipeline alignment has a number of issues in this particular area. In the southerly portion closest Cherry Drive, there does need or would need to be an agreement with Fast Property, which last I heard had not been concluded. Maybe it has since, but for various reasons there needed to be some negotiation or agreement there. And so that there were some questions at that time, May 21st, and I note that the item is not a part of the present report. So I just want to raise that this is an issue that perhaps we should encourage staff to bring forward to us in the next quarterly report, if not sooner, in case there are outstanding issues that council might be of interest to council. The pipeline alignment is partly overlays the potential route of a westway to Finch Drive roadway. that is of interest not only to Fast Property, but to the Squamish Nation. So there are a number of issues around the pipeline alignment that might need to be discussed, but I'm not aware of that. Perhaps they have been resolved. I just note that it's not a part of the present quarterly report, but it has been a part of the report in the past and has come forward with some, I did raise the issue on that occasion, May 21st. So would be interested if staff see that something needs to be brought to council that they should be encouraged to do so. Thank you. So I would otherwise move to receive the report.
So yeah, I just listening to the comments, I'm thinking a way that that could be captured is that would be to move receipt and request that a section of issues, if any, around outstanding issues on proposed alignment is included in the next quarterly update. Something to that nature. So would that satisfy your concern?
It would be agreeable. It captures my intent, Mayor Herford.
Okay. So I'm going to assign that motion to you, and I will second that. And I've got. Oh, sorry, Councillor Stoner, do you have a question, or would you like to speak to the motion we just arrived at?
I have a subsequent topic that I'd like to bring up with related to this correspondence.
Okay, thank you. So let's deal with this motion. It's motion to receive with that context around the next report, including the previously included piece on alignment issues, if any. I think we all understand what we have in front of us and the question we're being asked. So I will. Do you want to speak to this? Yep, go ahead, Councillor Penningham.
Just that I would concur with my colleague that there are many issues with the pipeline alignment, and I'm interested in knowing more, although maybe different things than my colleague. But you know.
Okay, thank you. I will call the question. All in favor? And any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, Councillor Stoner, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to propose another motion for council consideration, and that would be that staff come back to a future committee of the whole to discuss community engagement, monitoring and enforcement of the temporary use permit number 74 for the construction laid down yard. And if that is seconded, I'll speak to it.
Councillor Hamilton seconds. Go ahead. Councillor Stoner, we've lost your image and voice.
I think I can hear you again.
Okay, good. We're back. We can hear you. Go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that this is important to bring forward. I appreciate that there are still some pre-release conditions that the proponent is working through for their temporary use permit. Following council's decision to approve the TUP, there's ongoing concerns, especially from the immediate neighborhood, around how conditions are going to be monitored and enforced. And so I think it'd be useful to bring this forward as part of a council conversation, just so that we're all on the same page around the expectations and the ability of our staff to do monitoring and enforcement, and what the level of communication will be. So I'm hoping that my council colleagues would be supportive of having that conversation. I don't want to have it tonight. I know we don't have the right folks in the room, but I would like to have it at a future meeting with staff if possible.
Okay, and so I'm just going to go, thank you for that. I'm just going to go to the corporate officer to read out if possible, or I may ask you to restate your motion. I just want to make sure we understand exactly. And I'm hearing that is, Councillor Stoner, could you restate your motion for clarity, please?
Yeah, happy to. It's that staff come back to a future committee of the whole to discuss community engagement, monitoring and enforcement of the temporary use permit number 74 conditions.
Okay.
I can send that by email if that's helpful.
That would be helpful, but thank you for that. Council, on this, we have it's been moved and seconded. So any comments on this particular piece? I'll support the motion. I think I do think it's important that we provide what clarity is available when it shows itself in on this actually in any process, but particularly on this project. I think, and I know perhaps yeah, I'm happy that the motion didn't have a timeline as the process is still sort of ongoing. So we'll try to time, if this succeeds, I'll work with staff to time this with in relation to construction activities there as best as possible. But we'll see how those pieces can be fit together if this is supported broadly. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed, if any? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So the that takes us through. We had no business arising from the committee. We had no committee minutes reports. Council, any notice of motion? No. We do have a couple council staff and camera announcements that appear on our agenda. We didn't have any unscheduled public attendance. We're now into open question period. If there's anyone that would like clarification related to any agenda items. I see no hands going up in the room. I'm going to look to our staff to see if any hands are going up electronically. Nope, not this evening. Council or staff announcements? Anybody? Councillor French.
Thank you, Mayor Herford. I wanted to share that on Friday I had the honor of being the MC and DJ at the 49th annual 55 plus Christmas dinner. The evening included turkey dinner, a speech by the mayor, entertainment from young dancers from the Squamish Dance Center and singers with the Squamish Academy of Music. The seniors in attendance danced into the late hours. And I share this mainly because it's an important annual cultural gathering of the wisest community members, and an annual tradition that I look forward to every year.
Thank you very much. I'll go to Councillor Greenlaw.
Thanks, through the mayor. I had the pleasure of going to the attending the Seed Escape Blades Hit Broadway last weekend, and it was spectacular. My kids couldn't sleep that night because they were so excited, and it was just a really great production. It had people of all ages and all skill levels. It was really impressive to see such a great community event. I apologize to anybody who was sitting close to me because I was singing along to almost the entire show, given that I am a theater nerd. Among the highlights from you is the trio that skated to Memories. And anyways, I just wanted to say thanks to all the people who put in all the hard work to showcase all this local talent, and to give a heads up to anybody who hasn't been to it, to mark your calendars for next year, because it's definitely worthwhile. It was a really great production, and just over 200 skaters, again, of all ages, like 2 to, I don't know, 75. So it was really cool. It was really fun. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Others with an update? Okay, I'll do mine. I'll do my best to be brief. On December 6th, there was a Business Excellence Awards with put on by the Chamber of Commerce, and held at the Checkma Center. It was had the pleasure of attending, and it was great to spend some time with our business community as we celebrated the best of our business community, and really inspiring stories, and deserved. The winners obviously were well deserved, but the competition was so. We have so much depth in our business community. It was great to spend some time really reflecting on that, and being together. As I know, I have much respect for the business community and what it takes to really live your vision in the way that they do. So that was a great night, and just kudos to the Chamber and their team for putting together such an amazing event. Also on Friday, the 55 plus Christmas dinner, as we heard a little bit by by Councillor French. I don't know that the speech from the mayor was the main attraction, but it was great to be there. The last couple of years, I've had the pleasure of bringing my mother as my +1, so it was great to spend some time with the seniors in our community, get to know or see some familiar faces and get to know some new ones. As we know, around this table, the seniors are one of our fastest growing, if not the fastest growing segment of our community. So that was great. I also wanted to reflect on a little bit on the happening of the weekend, and really thank the community for stepping up during the closure of the highway. We heard many examples of the community reaching out to folks that needed some support, somewhere to be, with suggestions online and all this, and particularly the Sikh temple, the Gurdwara, just a block from here, really stepped up and as I've seen them do in the past, really generous contribution, and I think really reflects the overall the values of our community. So just a huge thank you to everyone that stepped up, and to our staff that was working hard on our response in the EOC. So and also my condolences to the folks in Lions Bay for their tragic loss. With that, I would be looking for a motion to terminate the meeting. Is that your motion, Councillor Hamilton? Seconded by Councillor Greenlaw. And all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
I think I had 3 hands up. 2 hands and a virtual hand. But oh well.
Sorry, there's a lag in the room. I don't know.
Fair enough. Happy holidays, everyone.